Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth deck breakdown of the Sorin historic list that I chose to play in the last Mythic qualifier. So we've got a full deck tech here, and then I've also got all of the rounds of the qualifier recorded, so you get to see a ton of gameplay of this deck as well. And now before I get into it, I just want to quickly say really sorry for the lack of videos over the past couple months. I was really busy around Christmas time, then straight after that ended up getting ill in the new year. Then I had 2 deck guide videos basically finished and all the footage corrupted, which sucked, and then straight after that I ended up injuring my shoulder, which made recording really difficult because I couldn't sit still for too long without my shoulder seizing up. So it's really been one thing after another the past couple months, but the important thing is now I can record again. Really miss putting the videos out, and not only have I got this video coming out, but in the run up to the Mythic qualifier I was testing out a bunch of other historic decks that I was really tempted to play in the event as well, and I'm going to be doing videos on all of them, so there should be, I don't know, at least 2 or 3 videos coming this week and then a few others afterwards. So again, really sorry for the lack of videos, but hopefully going forward we're going to have a much more regular schedule and get back on it. And also one more thing before I get into it is I've already put up a full deck guide article on this deck. It's over 5,500 words. It goes way more in depth on all the card choices and little tricks that you can do when you're playing the deck, as well as how I would change the deck for best of 1, and a full sideboard guide with a description of how I approach each matchup as well. So if you really want to get to grips with this deck and you're an MTG Zone Premium member, I'll leave a link down to that in the description as well. But anyway, with that all out of the way, this is my Sorin list. So like I said, I tested a bunch of different decks in the run-up to the qualifier, and this definitely felt like the best of the bunch to me. So as the name suggests, this is a deck that is running the combo of Sorin plus Saint Elender, so we want to get both of these cards into our hand, and then for 3 mana we can cast the Sorin, use the -3 ability to put the Elender into play, then pick whichever of the 4 spellbook options is the best, gain 4 life, you know, interact with the opponent or get another creature in play, get another avatar token, and then usually the Sorin survives. We can start plussing that to give the avatar token lifelink, so then we're getting in for 8 damage and get an 8/8 token. And so the idea here is that Elender is such a powerful card that it can just solo the game on its own. Now traditionally we've seen this combo in like an Orzhov shell with Dedicated Dollmaker and Overlord as kind of like another nice synergy going on there. But my big issue with that is that I think Sorin plus Elender is powerful, but there are a ton of decks that can just ignore it and go over the top of it. There's a ton of combo decks in the format right now that are capable of going infinite that don't care about Elender, and there are a bunch of other decks that can just go over the top of you anyway, right? So combo decks, you know, you've got stuff like Lotus Field, 4-color Samwise, Kethis, Yawgmoth, stuff like that, you know, Shifting Woodland as well. And then, you know, other decks, you've got like Mono Green Devotion that's capable of going over the top of you as well, even if you do get the turn 3 Saint Elender down. So I was a big fan of Sorin plus Elender, but I felt like for it to be effective, I really wanted to be running a very interactive heavy deck so that we can, you know, use discard spells in the early turn or creature removal to slow the opponent down so that a turn 3 Saint Elender is just capable of soloing the game on its own, and we don't have to worry about the opponent setting up an infinite combo because we're running a deck with 8 main deck discard spells and Jarsil as well. And speaking of which, the other main card in this deck that we're running, in addition to the Sorin combo, is Jarsil to double up on all of our discard spells, early interaction, and also these cards that help us assemble the combo more consistently as well. So the reason I wanted to run a very interactive heavy deck, I didn't really feel like, you know, pure mid-range decks are particularly well positioned just because they don't close the game out very quickly, which is why I wanted to run Sorin Elender here. It gives the deck kind of like a combo burst, if that makes sense. But I just felt like cheap interaction that we can double up on with Jarsil was really good against a lot of the format. Like I said, there's a lot of combo decks right now that these discard spells are great against. Shifting Woodland, 4-color Samwise, Lotus Field combo especially is quite soft to discard spells. They do have ways to draw out of it like Artist Talent, but it's good against them. Then you've got decks like Boros Auras where discard spells and cheap creature removal is excellent as well. It's great against Devotion, you know, other decks that can go over the top of you at just slowing them down. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got the aggro decks, you've got Borosaurus, you've got Is It Wizards, where, you know, Fatal Push and discard spells getting rid of their creatures is good. And then as a mid-range deck, we can pivot really well as well. If we are against creature decks, we've got Cut Down and Abrupt Decay in the sideboard, and we can trim on the discard spells. If we're up against the combo deck, we have some hate pieces and extra discard as well. So I just felt like the combination of really interactive heavy alongside Sorin really maximizes the ability of Elender to close the game out without having to worry about combo decks or decks that go bigger than you. So In terms of the early interaction, I really wanted to run 8 main deck discard spells for the reasons I've just explained. Thoughtseize is kind of self-explanatory. It's just the best in slot for a discard spell. And then for the extra 4 of discard spells, I initially had Inquisition of Kozilek, which I think is probably the default next best pick. But the fact it can't take cards with mana value 4 or higher is a very big deal, especially in the mirror matches against the Orzhov decks. So Orzhov Sorin definitely does go bigger than you, but again, that deck is all about synergies, right? They need to get Sorin plus Elender, they need to get Overlord plus Dedicated Dollmaker, so discard spells are particularly effective against them. Having said that, Inquisition is not great, specifically because of Overlord of the Baelmerk, right? If we look at the opponent's hand and they have Sorin, Elender, Baelmerk, and we have an Inquisition, that basically just does nothing, right? Because you take the Sorin, then on turn 2 they just play Baelmerk, get the Sorin back straight away. So break expectations, being able to take being able to take Overlord itself, and then in other matchups being able to pour over the pages against Lotus Field, being able to take the One Ring against Jeskai Control, being able to take, Storm the Festival, Cavalier of Thorns against Mono Green Devotion is very big. And then on top of that, specifically against Overlord, exiling with this is huge as well, because say, previous hand I was talking about against Orzhov, if the opponent has Sorin, Elender, Overlord, you can just take the Sorin there pretty happily because you exile. So even if the opponent does play the Overlord, they're not guaranteed to hit the Sorin again, which is really nice. Now, obviously, the two big downsides of break expectations is the opponent gets a card out of the spellbook, which, to be honest, doesn't come up very much. I think the only real concern is the ramp cards like a Razka Relic against Devotion, because that can work well with their proactive game plan. And then, obviously, aggro decks can get Gingerbrute. And then the other thing is there are some decks that do run looting effects. I think the main one that comes to mind is Lotus Field, because if they get an Artist Talent in play, they can just loot away whatever they get off the spellbook, whereas if it was a traditional discard spell, they wouldn't get to do that. And additionally, you can't hit 1-drops, which is relevant against opposing discard spells and specifically Utopia Sprawl when you're on the play against Devotion. But I don't think it comes up very often, and for the most part, the fact that this can hit more expensive cards is really big in a number of matchups, and the fact it exiles is particularly good against Orzhov Sorin. So I've definitely felt like this is the best in slot as a main deck discard spell to run alongside Thoughtseize. Fatal Push, fairly self-explanatory, just good against the majority of decks. There are very few decks that don't run any creatures right now. I think Lotus Field is the only one that comes to mind. Even Jeskai Control runs Strict Proctor and Flage and stuff like that. So Fatal Push very rarely going to be dead. I do prefer discard spells in the main deck, first of all, because like I said, it's just generally good against the format right now in general, but also because with Jarsel, we really want to guarantee a 1-drop in the graveyard, and if we did have 8 pieces of creature removal and the opponent doesn't have an early creature, not only will they just stay dead in our hand, but oftentimes Jarsel will be uncastable because we just won't have a 1-drop in the graveyard as well. So for that reason, I like maxing out on discard spells more. And then additionally, Abundant Harvest is a card that I always love playing alongside Jarsel. It just helps with consistency so much, not just in terms of hitting land drops and then also using it to find your 4-ofs more consistently, but also just guarantees that we've got, a card in the graveyard for Jarsel that we can use proactively, even if the opponent doesn't have anything crazy on board. Then the 2-drop slot, we've got 4 Assemble the Team and 4 Pillage the Bog, which fill a very similar role in this deck at, first of all, just trying to assemble the turn 3 combo more consistently, right? As we've seen in the Orzhov lists, they do run stuff like Overlord that helps them do this, but Assemble the Team finds it so much more consistently. If you cast this on turn 2 with a Sorin or a Elender in hand, statistically, you're very likely to find the other one if you cast it on turn 2, because your deck is so big, you get to see a lot of cards there, which is huge. So, a lot of the time with Assemble the Team, you can just go discard spell on turn 1, and then if you've got a Sorin or a Elender, assemble the team for the other part, and then just go for the combo on turn 3. So assemble the team, really huge at just finding the turn 3 Sorin more consistently. And then if we don't find it, or if we don't have either of the pieces, using Assemble the Team to find Jarsel is also huge, because then you have a curve where you can go, for example, Thoughtseize or Fatal Push on turn 1, Assemble the Team on turn 2, find Jarsel, then on turn 3, cast the Jarsel, recast one of your 1-mana pieces of interaction, and then if Jarsel also survives, you can then Assemble the Team and then dig towards your other combo pieces as well. So Assemble, great at finding Sorin plus Elender, and also finding Jarsel if we don't have anything better going on. And then Pillage the Bog is essentially just a worse version of Assemble the Team, but I really wanted to run 8 of this effect. I think it is really powerful. Now, unfortunately, Pillage the Bog only looks 4 cards deep on turn 2, so it isn't anywhere near as consistent as finding the other combo piece, but, you still have 4 looks to find it, which isn't that low. And again, you know, even if we don't find it, we can still pick Jarsel. And in terms of comparing this to alternatives that could fill a similar role, I did initially start out with Malevolent Rumble in this slot because obviously you get the ramp off it, it hits all of our key cards, and it also fills the graveyard for Jarsel, but it doesn't find pieces of interaction. And I have found, especially in grindy games or in the mid game, using a card like Pillage the Bog or Assemble the Team in order to find a card like Fatal Push or Abrupt Decay has been really big. Plus, there is actually a downside of milling over Saint Elenda, because if you go Rumble, mill over Saint Elenda, that then opens you up to Surgical Extraction, whereas if the opponent boards in Surgical against us with this particular build, the only way that they can get rid of Elenda, which is the most high impact target for Surgical, is if they have Thoughtseize into Surgical. So even though Pillage the Bog is quite a bit worse than Assemble the Team, I like having 8 of these because, like I said, it just helps us find the turn 3 combo more consistently, and it's really nice alongside Jarsel as well. And then we've got a 1-of Croxer here, which is mainly a concession to Fragment Reality. Fragment Reality is seeing a decent play in the main deck, mainly of the white-black Sorin lists, and I wanted to have a card that, if the opponent used Fragment, had a decent impact on its own. And also, like I said, Surgical on Saint Elenda can be an issue. I don't actually think Surgical Extraction is particularly good against our deck because, like I said, the only way they're going to extract an Elenda is with a discard spell into Surgical, and I don't actually think Surgical is very good against Jarsel because the trigger doesn't target. So if we have 2 different cards with mana value of the same intensity as Jarsel with different names, they can Surgical 1, but it doesn't stop the trigger because it doesn't target, if that makes sense. So I'm not too worried about Surgical, but I still wanted to have kind of like an alternate win condition if Elenda does get removed somehow. And the other really nice thing about it as well is that the decks that are likely to use Surgical against you, mainly the white-black decks, also tend to run Fragment Reality, which means we're more likely to find the Croxer. And then also against Jeskai Control, it's even potentially better because if they have a strict Proctor in play when they fragment your Jarsel, you get to keep the creature as well, and you can still pay 2 to make them discard a card as well. So I really like Croxer as a 1-of, just as insurance against Fragment Reality. And then finally, we've got Abrupt Decay here. I really wanted 3 copies of this in the 75 because it's, you know, Pithing Needle naming Sorin is definitely good against us. It shuts off our most powerful lines. So Abrupt Decay just gives us an out to Pithing Needle. Obviously, any deck can bring Needle in against us. And so Decay is just good across the board because it can take out creatures, it can take out Bombardment, it can take out Birthing Ritual, and it can take out Pithing Needle, which is a concern in the vast majority of matchups. And I just like having 1 in the main deck because I felt I wanted a bit more removal in addition to the Fatal Pushes. And running 1 in the main deck just saves up a sideboard slot because, like I said, I did want 3 in the 75. And then for the mana base, 22 lands might seem very low in a deck that needs to hit its 3rd land drop consistently every single game, but we do have 4 Abundant Harvest that kind of acts as an additional mana source, so 26 lands kind of, you know, in theory overall, should mean that we hit our 3rd land drop very consistently. In terms of the actual lands themselves, because we do run a slightly lower land count and we are a 3-colour deck, we are running basically just no utility lands at all, just all fixing to ensure that we have the colours on curve when we need them. And then I still think it's worth running a basic because of Field of Ruin, White Orchid, Phantom, those sorts of effects. So that's the main deck. I've been really impressed with it. Like I said, I think cheap interaction is just really good in the format in general right now, discard spells in particular. And then I think Sorin plus Elenda is at its best alongside a bunch of disruptions, so that against the combo decks, against the decks that go bigger than you, you can slow them down to the point where Elenda is just able to solo, if that makes sense. And then moving on to the sideboard, we've got a single copy of Pithing Needle, which has a number of matchups where we can bring it in. Against the Sacrifice decks, I usually use this to name Goblin Bombardment. You can bring this in against Devotion to name Carnal Kiora. You can bring it in against the Woodland decks to name Shifting Woodland. So number of decks where this is really nice. 3 copies of Stone of Erech, mainly here for the Sacrifice decks. I still think, you know, Mardu Sacrifice and 4-colour Samwise are very powerful decks for sure. And this is just excellent against them. You know, it stops the Johnny from flipping, shuts off all of their death triggers on, you know, Unlucky Witness, Goblin Trap Finder, Marionette Apprentice. So this card in play just really slows their deck down to a halt. So 3 copies because you really want to draw it as consistently as possible. The opponent has to go out of their way to remove it. So actually having a backup 1 in hand is decent in these sorts of matchups as well. well. Not to mention it can be recast with Jarsil, and you can also bring it in as Graveyard Hate if you really need. If you are against an all-in graveyard deck like Shifting Woodland, for example, you could bring this in addition to Surgical Extraction, but you know, it is kind of clunky and slow. But if you need the extra Graveyard Hate, you can bring it in there. Then 3 copies of Damping Sphere is basically exclusively here for Lotus Field combo, which is a deck that I felt like we did have a good game plan against, but the big issue against Lotus Field is we're super reliant on discard spells in order to interact early on, which means that all they need to do is just draw well off the top, and particularly with a card like Artist Talent that can loot them and ensure that they don't draw dead off the top. I just felt like, you know, game one just comes down to how well the opponent top decks out of your discard spells. So having Damping Sphere as a way to then also shut off their good top decks is really huge. And not only that, not only does it shut off Lotus Field, which their whole deck is built around, but it also limits their ability to chain spells together. So, you know, say they have a bunch of Considers and Sleight of Hands to try and find an out to Damping Sphere. The other ability on this limits their ability to dig for an answer as well, which is pretty big. Then we got 2 copies of Cut Down as additional cheap interaction. Now, I initially had Culling Ritual in this slot, which I think is a really good card in the format right now, particularly against the Lurrus decks, but I wasn't a huge fan of Culling Ritual in this particular build because I feel like we really want the extra interaction we're bringing in to be recastable off Jarsil, and I also felt like getting to 4 mana when we don't have any ramp in this deck isn't going to happen a lot of times against the Lurrus decks, right? You know, if you bring it in against a deck like Boros Auras or Is It Wizards, you kind of need to have early interaction to buy you time to get to turn 4 to cast the Culling Ritual in the first place. So in these matchups, you kind of need early interaction for Culling Ritual to be castable. On top of that, I also think it's pretty awkward with our other sideboard plan against the Sacrifice decks, right? You don't want to be bringing in Culling Ritual and Stone of Erect together. That doesn't really make much sense. So you would only really be bringing in Culling Ritual against decks like Boros Auras or Is It Wizards, where I think Cut Down is generally better anyway. So I think Culling Ritual is a really well-positioned card, but I think I prefer it in the sideboard of decks that can ramp. So, for example, one of the other decks I'm going to be talking about over the coming weeks is Jund Ulamog combo, which runs both Utopia Sprawl and Malevolent Rumble, so you can cast Culling Ritual on turn 3 a lot of the time. In this deck, I just think Cut Down is just generally the better card, especially because we're bringing in Stone against the Sacrifice decks. And we got 2 copies of Duress, just extra discard spells against decks like Lotus Field, Jeskai Control, any kind of non-creature combo deck. So just, you know, increasing our discard spells ensures that we have them there. 2 copies of Surgical Extraction as Graveyard Hate. I didn't feel like Stone of Erect was fast or consistent enough, really, and I felt like we had... I felt like we had most other matchups covered with our extra discard spells or our extra interaction. So it was decks like, you know, Kethis combo, Shifting Woodland, Emperor of Bones sort of things, where we wanted Surgical. And the reason why I've gone for Surgical over any other Graveyard Hate is, first of all, it's 0 mana, which is huge with Assemble the Team and Pillage the Bog, right? Because it means that, say we are against a Graveyard deck, if we cast Assemble the Team on turn 2 and find it, we can just cast it straight away, right? We don't need to wait for additional mana. And then the reason I've gone for this over Tormod's Crypt is that I feel like, first of all, the extraction effect is more useful against the most commonly played graveyard decks, like, you know, getting rid of an Omniscience against the Shifting Woodland decks is pretty huge. And it's also recastable off Jarsil, so you can potentially extract 2 targets as well off a single card. So Surgical has definitely felt worth it. And then, like I said earlier, Abrupt Decay is a card that I bring in the vast majority of matchups. I even bring it in against Lotus Field to be able to answer Artist Talent and Pithing Needles. So this card basically gets brought in every single matchup, can take out creatures, can take out enchantments and artifacts, and Pithing Needle is the main one because obviously any deck can bring that in against you. So that's the deck overall. Like I said, I just feel like Sorin and Elenda is a really powerful 2-card combo, but there's a lot of decks that can go over the top of that, so running it alongside a bunch of cheap interaction can help slow the opponent down to the point where Elenda can just solo the game. So the deck has felt really strong to me, and the really nice thing about it is I feel like it's also really adaptable to format changes as well. Because you're a mid-range deck, because you have really good options in the sideboard, you can just tweak this to whatever the top emerging decks are. And yeah, I just feel like it's a really malleable deck that should be able to adapt to changes in the format. So as I said, I've got all rounds of the qualifier coming up. I didn't record audio at the time because I wanted to focus on the rounds, so the commentary that I'm going to be adding is kind of like added after the fact. But either way, this deck has performed really well, and I'm really excited to keep playing with this. Either way, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Big up. Okay, so going into round 1 here, we're on the draw, which is a little bit annoying, but, you know, obviously going to happen over the course of these rounds. This hand is really close. I think I end up keeping this one. I really wish that one of these lands was another card, basically, but I feel like, you know, we've got Thoughtseize on 1, Pillage on 2 to ideally either find Saint Elender or Jarsil, potentially. And then we draw Jarsil off the top, which is great as well. So even if we kind of whiff off Pillage, we've still got a reasonable follow-up the next turn. So we're up against Devotion here. Definitely going to lead on the Thoughtseize, and I think it makes sense to take out the Trailblazer here. If they didn't have a Trailblazer, I think I would probably take out the Birds of Paradise, but Trailblazer can essentially act as a ramp spell that also produces card advantage. So while the Birds of Paradise does, you know, get them closer to casting Cavalier and Khan, for example, I feel like Outcast the Trailblazer is the card that will allow them to go over the top quicker, if that makes sense, which is what we want to try and avoid. So going to go and Pillage the Bog on 2 here, and we're trying to find Saint Elender, and we find it, which is great. Typically against Devotion, I found the way this matchup usually plays out is that you just want to use your early interaction, usually off the back of discard spells, to just slow down their ability to go over the top of you so that Elender can win the game. Because obviously Devotion can very easily go over the top of Elender if they do have those crazy, you know, Storm the Festival, Nykthos turns, or they get a ton of mana available and can start pulling stuff out the Calm Wish board, for example. And they do find a Nykthos off the Cavalier, which is a little bit concerning, but so that does mean that next turn they'll be able to, you know, play Khan and probably get like a 4-drop. But I still don't think that's huge, right? They can obviously get the 1 ring, but obviously it's nerfed in Historic, so they have to pay to activate it. Here, I definitely think the pick should be Faith's Fetters. It's a little bit annoying that it doesn't actually remove the Cavalier, so they'll still get the extra 3 Devotion for Nykthos off this, but being able to stop the Cavalier from attacking Sorin this turn and also prevent it from defending Khan next turn seems really big there. So obviously we could have gone for the Cleric instead, which would then enable us to potentially use the Sorin to plus and take out Khan if they play it. So that's another potential line, but I've just felt like in general taking Cavalier out of combat feels higher impact to me. And also Khan could obviously just go minus, grab Pithing Needle, naming Sorin, which then makes the Inspiring Cleric worse, I think. So on balance, I do think I prefer going for the Faith's Fetters here. And I do feel like in a pretty good spot here. Obviously, the opponent can either get a big expensive artifact like a Portal to Phyrexia here to play for next turn. And, you know, obviously that kind of relies on the Cavalier surviving here. Or they could potentially grab something like the 1 ring here, which they can't activate this turn unless they have an extra mana from somewhere. But it just means that we can easily attack down the Khan, get another token off the Saint Elender, start plussing up the Sorin, and also means they don't have a good follow-up the following turn. Obviously, they can activate the 1 ring, but if they're having to wait a single turn just to pay a mana to draw a card, then that's not ideal. So they do go for the Portal to Phyrexia, which I think is probably the better line from their point of view, really, because, you know, even if we take out the Khan here, you know, at best we're going to be getting another token, which is 3 creatures. But unfortunately for the opponent, we do have the Jarsil here. So we're going to plus the Sorin, give the 4/4 lifelink so that we make an 8/8 during the end step. Then we can flashback the Thoughtseize with the Jarsil, get rid of the Portal. We can attack down the Khan with both creatures. Obviously, we don't want to give them the opportunity to just chump block with the birds and keep their Khan around. So I feel like we're in a good spot here. Obviously, the opponent still has the potential to go off, right? If they ended up drawing Storm the Festival and they go Outcast it into Storm, hit 2 Cavaliers or something, then we'd be in real trouble. But, you know, the opponent does need to get quite lucky here. We also have 2 Pillage the Bogs next turn, which are going to be looking pretty deep because of the number of lands that we're going to have in play. It's interesting the opponent chose not to play the Outcaster here. You know, usually that would only really happen if they have a card in their hand that they want to be able to ramp into. And looking back on this now, I'm not 100% sure I like going for Pillage main phase here, really. I think it's probably best to go to combat and then get 1 off the Jarsil just to see in case it affects what we're playing. But I guess we don't really have anything that costs more than 3 here. So this is kind of a weird spot. I very, very rarely get Croxa off Jarsil, but we didn't really have many better options. And, you know, it's a source of excess damage. It's a source of discard here and stuff. So then we get another Pillage off, and I'm just going to go for another Saint Elender here in case we... you know, in case they attack down the Sorin, because next turn we can recast the Sorin with Jarsil off Intensity 3, and then, you know, it resets the loyalty. We can minus to get another Elender in play here. So I feel pretty confident about this spot. Again, I think the opponent is holding on to the Outcaster so that it doesn't die to Fatal Push, so that they can actually start drawing if they do draw something like a Storm the Festival or an Elesh Norn off the top, for example. So they did run out the Outcaster here. Presumably they've drawn another creature to trigger it. I guess they just need blockers in play regardless, right? Even if they haven't drawn anything good. Although the opponent's in real trouble here because, you know, even if they do get enough chump blockers in play, we can just activate Sorin to dome them for 3 here. So they did draw the Storm the Festival at the top. I actually forgot that happened. So very good draw from the opponent here. There is still a way that we can lose this game for sure, right? If the opponent does have a crazy hit here, for example, like Outcaster into Cavalier, then they can start drawing a ton. They can potentially get Khan into a Chroma's Memorial and then, you know, attack down the Sorin, make it really difficult for us to deal this final point of damage. But we do have the Croxter here as well. So, you know, if the opponent does run out their hand and are just left with a bunch of lands in hand, then we can potentially deal the last few points of damage there. They draw another Nykthos, so, you know, in the moment I'm really concerned that we might end up losing this game just due to a really good top deck from the opponent, right? Not only did they top deck Storm, they also hit Outcast it into Cavalier, which drew them a ton of cards to be able to keep going. So yeah, sweating a little bit in the moment here because it did feel like this game was pretty much locked up, right? We saw that they have basically nothing in hand off the break expectations. Obviously, they could have, in theory, had a 1-drop, but the only 1-drops that Devotion tend to run are Utopia Sprawl, Birds of Paradise, and I don't see why they wouldn't just run those out if they had them, especially Birds of Paradise, because it's just another chump blocker. So putting it in the tank here about Storm the Festival, usually a bad sign, usually means they've got multiple lines here and they're just trying to figure out what is best. But, like I said, the opponent is in trouble here, right? Because even if they do get a whole board of chump blockers in play, we can just go Sorin, sacrifice the Saint Elenda, deal 3 directly to the opponent. If they end up taking out the Sorin this turn, for example with an Chroma's Memorial, we can just recast it with the Jarsel. So they do hit Khan and they hit an extra Utopia Sprawl, so they do have access to, what is that, 6 mana here? So they have a few options, right? They could take out the Sorin with something like a Sky Sovereign, but then we just recast it with Jarsel, activate, go face. They could grab Pithing Needle, which shuts off the Sorin lines, or they could also grab the 1 ring here, which I think, remembering is what they do go for, which I think is a good line, right? Means that they don't have to worry about the Sorin ability, means they don't have to worry about us going face. And obviously starts drawing them cards as well. However, they're at 1. So if they do activate it, they need to have some way to remove it, right? They could potentially go activate -Khan, get Haywire Might potentially. But they can't really activate it this turn, which is kind of awkward for them. So here, we've got a few options. We can sacrifice the Saint Elenda to kill the Khan. We could also just put the second Saint Elenda into play here as well. And then recast the Sorin with the Jarsel, which is what I go for here. And looking back on it, I think this is a pretty reasonable line. We can also get the Inspiring Cleric in play here, which then enables us to, you know, have another creature that we could sacrifice to the Sorin this turn as well, if we didn't want to get rid of the Elenda, which we obviously don't want to do. And we've obviously got Fatal Push here, which is a pretty big deal. So we're obviously going to be recasting the Sorin here. And then I think I'm just going to be using the Sorin Lightning Helix ability to take out the Khan here. Because if we attack, they can obviously, you know, chump block with the Cavalier, which then enables them to get back the best card from their graveyard, which could be Khan that we've just taken out, for example, which could be pretty bad. So either way, going to lead on the Croxer here, because if they do just have lands in hand, we just win. And it turns out they did, so we probably should have just led with that. It would have saved us some time and, you know, a bit of information. But so against Devotion here, in my testing with this deck, I hadn't actually played against this matchup very much, so I'm not actually sure the best way to sideboard. I end up choosing to bring in Damping Spheres here, which in retrospect, I don't actually like that much in this matchup, because Damping Sphere does do a number of things in this matchup, right? It shuts off Nykthos, and it shuts off their kind of explosive combo turns, because every card costs more each time. So, you know, those turns where they go Cavalier Mill over Storm the Festival, use Kiora to untap Nykthos, play the Storm from the graveyard, whatever. Damping Sphere also limits those kind of turns as well. However, it doesn't stop Utopia Sprawl because the mana is generated separately from the land, and it also doesn't stop Fanatic of Ronus, so it's not as backbreaking as against Lotus combo, for example. So this hand is kind of risky. I mean, it's risky against discard decks, which we obviously know we're not up against. I'm going to lead on the Thoughtseize here because even if we miss our next land drop, we can still harvest for it, which isn't ideal, but I feel like it's more important to get Thoughtseize off on turn 1 here because it shuts off cards like Trailblazer, cards like Kiora that can really accelerate them. So here they've obviously got a lot of ramp. I think I'm going to take out the Outcaster here because we're not really too worried about Karn, right? They just have a bunch of mana dorks here, really, so they're not really going to be able to... I mean, obviously they can ramp into Karn and then get something, but, you know, I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact on the game. So I think we have to go Harvest Naming Land and just hope to draw a black land here, which is huge. So we do. Now we can go Thoughtseize, take away the Karn, and now the opponent's just left completely at the mercy of the top of their deck. Unfortunately, they do have a lot of acceleration here, and obviously Fanatic of Ronus becomes even better if they draw a 4-power creature as well. So they will be able to play basically everything they draw off the top here, but they've got a lot of whiffs, right? If they hit another land or piece of acceleration, that's going to basically do nothing here. So this is a pretty interesting spot. I think I like going for Assemble. Like, obviously the big question here is whether you want to go for Damping Sphere or not. With Fanatic and Kiora, which is kind of one of their main ways of getting around Damping Sphere, I don't really like playing it here. And, you know, in this moment, I was kind of realizing, okay, Damping Sphere doesn't actually look very good in this moment. So they do draw a 4-power creature off the top, which kind of sucks because it basically replaces itself because of the Kiora, and now they have a ton of mana available, right? They have 8 mana off the Fanatics, which they can get back off the Kiora. They're going to start drawing. Now, if they draw any more 4-power creatures, they start drawing again. So, unfortunately, you know, this, and then they draw Storm off the top as well. So, kind of unfortunate. We did get a little bit punished for not playing the Damping Sphere here, I guess, because it limited their ability to change stuff together. But they could have still played the Storm the Festival here regardless because of the Kiora untap, even under Damping Sphere. So there's no way that we're going to recover from this, right? We rely on St. Lelanders to win the game, and that was a point where we just, you know, St. Leander can't overcome that board state, basically. So, having realised that Damping Sphere isn't actually that good in this matchup, I end up pivoting to Abrupt Decay, which I especially like on the play. I think if I'd been on the play, even in Game 2, I would have brought in Abrupt Decay because it shuts off a ton of their ramp, but being on the play, it also cuts off Utopia Sprawl before they get to untap with it as well, which is huge because a lot of the time with Devotion, you have to keep hands with just Utopia Sprawl as your early acceleration. So that first hand, we really want to have a good proactive game plan, and I felt like we were just a little bit too dirtly there, a little bit too many cards that dig and not enough immediate action. This is going to be a keep for sure, and I think I like putting back the Pithing Needle here, right? We've got Expectations to lead on 1, we've got Decay to take out, you know, another piece of acceleration early, we've got Assemble the team to try and find a lender. So Pithing Needle probably seems like the least impactful out of all of these. You know, it could be debatable which one is better compared to Abrupt Decay, but Needle is only really great against Karn, really, because even if you Needle Kiora, they still get the passive ability to draw. So Break Expectations, this is an example of a situation where the downside of not hitting 1-drops is pretty big, because I think there's a very good chance from the hand we've seen from the opponent here that they probably have a Utopia Sprawl. So missing Sprawl on 1 is, you know, one of the only real downsides of running Break Expectations instead of something like Inquisition of Kozilek. But you know, that and also missing opponent's discard spells. But for the most part, it hasn't really mattered outside of that. This is also another matchup where giving the opponent a card off the spellbook can be an issue as well, because they can get Arch of Araska, I think is what it's called. It's basically just a 3-mana rock. But obviously in a deck like Devotion, where they have Sprawl and Mana Dorks on 1, them just playing an Araska Relic on turn 2 actually works pretty well with their proactive game plan. So here we're going to lead on Harvest, Naming Land, and just go for Assemble the team there. Last turn there was a decision whether we wanted to try and get a lender or just take out the Mana Dork. But I think in this matchup, like you saw last game, we have to really slow the opponent down so that they can't go over the... You know, they can't generate a board state that a lender is unable to beat, basically. And so I wanted to take out the Mana Dork there. If we'd had Sorin into a lender, I think we just go, you know, obviously go for the combo and then Faith's Fetters the Birds of Paradise. But there, I think we just take the Mana Dork out, keep the opponent off the board early, which is really key. Get the lender down here, and then just start trying to close the game out as quickly as possible. because we want to close out the game really quickly, we basically always go for Inspiring Cleric in this matchup. Not only because it just presents a faster clock, but also because it gives us the ability to sacrifice the Cleric to get the Helix mode, which is going to be really useful here, for example, in order to take out the Trailblazer, which is a very key card for them because it generates a ton of card advantage. So thankfully, the opponent doesn't have Sprawl or Nykthos yet, so they can't really utilise the untap ability on Cura that well. So yeah, it looks like the opponent's thinking of shipping it back. We're definitely going to jam the Jarsil here, and then I guess it just comes down to whether we want to sacrifice the Inspiring Cleric or not, and I think it just makes sense to, right? We take out the Trailblazer, which just really limits their ability to, you know, keep chaining stuff together like we saw last game. Then we go Jarsil. We can go for another discard spell here, take out the Elesh Norn or Storm the Festival, which we see here as well. Definitely going to take out the Elesh Norn here, and then we can attack down the Cura, gain another 4 life, get another token in play. And obviously the opponent's hand is pretty scary because if they go runner 2 lands here, they do have a chance to go Storm the Festival. But I'm hoping by that point in the game, we should be just too far ahead on board for it to really matter, right? Even if they hit perfect, we should have, you know, 2 4/4s, a 3/3, and a 7/7 in play here. So the opponent does get the Spike Pick Trap off the spellbook, which, you know, we're not concerned about at all, right? They can use that to kill Jarsil potentially, but, you know, we're so far ahead on board with other creatures that it shouldn't really matter, I don't think. So the opponent does find the land, which does mean that they're going to get Storm the Festival down next turn, but, you know, we're going to be getting in for so much damage this turn. If we connect with a 7/7 lifelinker, we then get like an 11/11 next turn, which is going to be really hard for them to effectively block. So even if the opponent does find land into Storm, I think they need to hit pretty much perfectly in order to survive here. So I'm feeling pretty confident. Opponent's just in the tank about probably whether to run out that vehicle that they got off the spellbook or whether to activate the Spike Pit Trap. I mean, if they don't have anything else, they probably have to activate the Pit Trap, right? So they take out the Jarsil here, but, you know, they're still taking a huge amount of damage this turn. So we're going to lead on Harvest here just to see what we hit. We hit Thoughtseize, which is nice, right? Gets the other Storm the Festival out of their hand in case they did set it up. Wow. Triple Storm. I mean, thankfully, it's pretty unlikely they're going to be able to, you know, cast multiple of those in the same turn. And like I said, we're getting another huge creature here. So even if the opponent does find a land off the top, I'm pretty confident we should be good here. Right, even if they hit double Cavalier, I don't think that's going to be good enough. So yeah, so we end up picking up round 1, which is always huge. And, you know, happy to see Devotion because it has felt like a good matchup. Okay, so round 2, and we're on the draw again, which is a little bit annoying. And we open with a 1-lander, so got to ship this one back. If we had Abundant Harvest, then I'd consider this probably. But, you know, just with a 1-lander, even on the draw, I'm not happy about keeping this one. Right, we really, really need to hit our 3rd land drop every single game. And even though we have Pillage here, there's still a decent chance that we might not find our 2nd land on curve, which would be an absolute disaster. So got to ship this one back, unfortunately. And then this hand is even worse, I think. You know, we have 2 Sorins and no ways to dig for it. Decay does give us a decent turn 2 play. And obviously, if we know we've got a lender in the top few, we've got to keep that. But got to go down to 5, which is a little bit annoying. But having said that, you know, at our core, we are essentially a combo deck. So even if we go down to 5, if we can still Sorin on 3, we've still got a decent chance of winning here. So this hand is definitely going to be a keep, right? We do actually have, you know, 2 lands, Assemble and Sorin. Obviously, we've got to put 2 cards back here. So looking at this hand, it's probably going to be Pillage. Well, definitely going to be Pillage the Bog for sure, because Assemble the Team is just much better at finding a lender, especially on turn 2. And then it's just whether we want to lead on Thoughtseize or Abundant Harvest here, right? And I think on the draw, I can't remember what I pick here, but I actually like putting back the Harvest, so happy I did that. The reason to keep Harvest over Thoughtseize is just to guarantee the 3rd land. And we draw a lender off the top, which is actually pretty nice because it means that we can now use Assemble to find a 3rd land. So we're against Lotus combo here, so definitely going to take the cheaper enablers. Pour over the pages takes a while to get online, so... And now we find the 3rd land, so we can actually assemble for something different here, which is pretty nice. Unfortunately, we don't have a red land here, which kind of sucks, so we can't pick Jarsil. We could pick another discard spell. I end up going for a red land here, though, I think, just to make our future top decks live, which, looking back on it, I'm not sure I love, to be honest, because we're guaranteed to go Sorin into a lender. The only red cards that would really make an impact here are Jarsoul, so I think looking back on it now, I might have taken an extra discard spell, to be honest. Right, we go Sorin into a lender, and then just use discard spells to try and limit their ability to combo off through that. I think makes the most sense. So looking back on it now, I'm not sure I love taking the red lands here. And, you know, had we taken a Thoughtseize or Break Expectations, we could go Sorin into a lender and then use 2 discard spells here, which would basically just leave them at the mercy at the top of their deck. So I do think I made a slight mistake there. You know, the upside of going for a red land here isn't really that high unless we happen to draw exactly Jarsoul or Croxer. So Faith Fetters on Deserted Temple here is nice because that does limit their ability to combo off even if they can set up Lotus Field plus Deserted Temple. Now, it does mean in all likelihood that they'll probably just sacrifice this Deserted Temple to Lotus Field trigger unless they happen to draw a Consign to Memory off the top here, but you know, I still think that's good, right? Lotus Field combo, they really need 2 lands together, whether that's double Lotus Field or Lotus Field plus Deserted Temple. So shutting that off means that even if they have, you know, combo enablers, it's not as deterministic as it otherwise would be, if that makes sense. So they do run out the Lotus Field here, and they do sacrifice the Deserted Temple, which makes sense. So here we're flooded with discard spells, but again, basically just means that they're going to be completely reliant on the top of their deck. Obviously, they will get a card off the spellbook here, but for Lotus Field combo, I don't think there's anything they can really get here that matters. Opponent obviously going to be in the tank here because they do have a lot of mana here, right? And there are a few options off the spellbook which are mana sinks, like the Whirler Maker, for example, but that, you know, that's just way too slow to make a difference here. So okay, so end up going for 50 feet of rope. We're just going to plus on the token, play the land out, get in here, get another 4/4 down. And now we have more than lethal, right? Even if they take out the Elenda, or even if they stop the Elenda untapping with the 50 feet of rope here, we still have exactly 12 damage in play. They don't really run any creatures in most builds I've seen. I guess they run Vizier of Tumbling Sands, which they could run out as a blocker here potentially. But yeah, it looks like we should just get the win here, right? Exact lethal. So getting in is, or stealing game 1 against Lotus Field is huge because I think the matchup improves quite a lot post-sideboard. Damping Sphere is an absolute nightmare for them to deal with because it shuts off Lotus Field itself and also shuts off their ability to chain multiple spells together in the same turn, you know, to potentially dig towards an out, if that makes sense. So definitely want the Damping Spheres. Just debating what else we want here. I think Duress is nice. We saw last game how good the discard spells can be. And then I think I also like bringing just 1 extra Abrupt Decay here, just to give us an extra out to Artist Talent and potentially to Pithing Needle as well. Right, as you saw last game, we are pretty reliant on Elenda to close games out, so I like bringing the extra Abrupt Decay. If I do see Pithing Needle game 2, I'd probably go up to the 3rd as well, because it does actually slow us down quite a lot if they can get a Needle down, and we just don't find our 2 of Abrupt Decay that quickly. But yeah, this matchup has felt really good in testing. Discard spells in multiples is really punishing against them, especially when you get Jarsoul online. They obviously can draw out of it, right? If they do get their Lotus Field onlines early, even if you take away their enablers, the risk of running a deck that is very reliant on discard spells is obviously that they can top deck well out of it, they can draw well out of it, right? So if they do draw combo enablers game 1, that is a way that they can potentially go over the top of you. But post-sideboard, we've got even more discard spells to limit their ability to set up or go off, depending on what stage of the game it is. And then we've also got Damping Sphere to just shut off their top decks as well, right? So overall, this matchup has felt good. I still definitely think it's worth dedicating sideboard slots to the Damping Spheres because Lotus Field has so many good cards that they can draw off the top that then enable them to combo off. And especially if we don't have a very quick Elenda, you know, if we have to use Assemble the Teams once or twice to set up the combo, that can buy them enough time that they can just draw a Pour Over the Pages or Hidden Strings or whatever, you know, Underworld Breach, Artist Talent off the top that really gets them straight back into the game. So this hand's pretty awkward. Elenda, no Sorin and a bunch of discard. Can't keep that one because it's just got a red-green land. This hand is interesting though. We've got turn 3 Sorin and Alinda, and turn 2 Damping Sphere. So this hand is pretty slow, and it does rely on us drawing a third land to do our thing, obviously. Okay, Break Expectations is pretty nice. As long as we can find a land here, I'll be pretty happy. Okay, snap off on Artist Talent here. Artist Talent is one of the best cards against our game plan. Slightly less so post-sideboard because we have Damping Sphere and Abrupt Decay, but especially game 1, you know, like I said, the way that Lotus Field beats us is by top decking well out of our discard spells. And Artist Talent not only really helps them set that up because they have an inherent mana sink in the card, so even if they don't draw well, they can reduce the cost of all their spells. So then if they do draw something off the top, it's even easier for them to combo off from there. And also, you know, it loots through their hands so quickly that, you know, it helps them not draw dead, basically. So unfortunately, opponent does have a Spell Pierce here, which is a little bit awkward. I still think we're absolutely jamming on 2 no matter what there, because we want to just jam Sorin on 3, right? I would kind of... Well, I mean, Damping Sphere is probably better than Sorin here, but like we need an active way to close the game out, right? So I would prefer, with this hand, them to Spell Pierce the Damping Sphere so that we can get the Sorin off, because we know that hand isn't particularly good right now. So in this spot, we're obviously really hoping to draw a land off the top. Pretty unfortunate that we don't, so we'll lead on the Break Expectations here, get rid of one of the hidden strings just to limit their ability to combo off, and then hopefully we can draw a land next turn. And we do have a pretty high land count overall. We've got 22 actual lands plus 4 Abundant Harvest. Now, Abundant Harvest in this spot wouldn't actually be that good because we'd have to spend a mana to get a land here, which would, you know, not enable us to cast Sorin the same turn. But, you know, if we do draw Abundant Harvest next turn, that is the line that we'll have to take, because we just want to get Sorin down as early as possible here, really. So go for the Magistrate's Scepter. Again, I don't think that's likely to come up at all. You know, the vast majority of matchups, the spellbook cards don't really matter. So the opponent has Deserted Temple here, which is pretty scary because, you know, they've got hidden strings, right? They can untap both of them and then potentially draw into pour over the pages or Underworld Breach, and then we're just cooked, right? We just can't really beat that from that point, and they're very likely to be able to combo off. So just got to hope that they don't find anything good off the hidden strings here, really. Because our game plan is pretty clear here. We just hope the opponent can't combo off, which we've done a pretty good job at slowing them down with discard spells, and just pray that we find the third land for Sorin here. So the fact the opponent's in the tank for so long does make me think they probably don't have enough to go off, because if they did, they would probably just go for it. I think the opponent is debating, do I just jam hidden strings here and hope to draw something to help me combo off, or do I just jam these kind of useless artifacts that they've got off the spellbook? Okay, yeah, so they go for Expedition Map and the Magistrate's Scepter, and thankfully we do draw a land here. So interesting choice whether we want to go for Invoke the Divine, Faith's Fetters, or Inspiring Cleric here. Got a lot of different choices. I think we should just go for Faith's Fetters here on the Deserted Temple, just because that does limit the abilities. That does limit the ability of the opponent to combo off here. Now, they can use Expedition Map to find another Deserted Temple, but they have to invest 2 mana up front to do that. And our goal here is to just slow them down from comboing off as much as possible. So the opponent having to invest 2 mana here in order to activate the Expedition Map is fine from my point of view, because it just delays them by an entire turn, basically, which is huge at this point, because next turn we'll be getting in for 8, presumably, unless the opponent has removal of some kind. You know, it would have to be blue bounce to be able to deal with creatures this big. And then, you know, we get another token, so we basically force the opponent to combo off next turn, or they're basically just dead here. So put it in the tank again. They do have Artist Talent, which is a bit of a concern, because that is one way that they can potentially, you know, they can obviously pump mana into Artist Talent to help them combo off. They can obviously loot away dead cards like the spellbook cards. And I guess this is another situation where the spellbook cards can be beneficial for the opponent, because they can just loot them away. Not many decks are running looting effects right now, so this is one of the few matchups that sort of thing is likely to come up in, but, you know, always worth being aware of. Okay, so Jostle's a nice draw here for sure, because it means if they're holding on to like a key combo card like Pour Over the Pages, they're forced to draw a non-land off the top to give them a chance here. So they've either got a 1-drop or a land in hand. They've still got the Expedition Map activation, obviously, here. But if they don't have a combo card in hand, which we kind of know they don't already, they might be forced, and they do grab a Fiery Islet just to try and combo off. But I don't even know with, I haven't played enough with Lotus Field myself to know if it's really consistent that you can combo off without being able to activate Deserted Temple. So it might have been better off for them to just grab another one. But if they don't have a combo enabler in hand, there's nothing they can do. So yeah, end up getting a straight 2-0 against Lotus Field, which is obviously great because it is a scary deck. Okay, so going into round 3 here at 2-0, which is great. And we're on the play, which is huge as well. So definitely need to keep this, right? We've got, we're on the play. We've already got Sorin plus Elender. We've got both Assemble the Team and Pillage the Bog to, at worst, find the third land to be able to, set up the turn 3 combo. So even though we don't have turn 1 interaction, which I ideally want to have here, I still think this is a decent start. So I'm going to lead on Pillage the Bog here rather than Assemble the Team because I'm kind of worried about the opponent having a Spell Pierce here. I'm a bit worried about why they've shocked in the Watery Grave. They don't have an end of turn cantrip, so that just signals to me that they have a Fatal Push in hand. Like, that must be what that means. So they run out Psychic Frog, which is huge. It means their shield's down for counter spells. We can just run out Sorin, go for Saint Elender, and then just go Faith's Fetters on the Psychic Frog, which prevents them, setting up any graveyard shenanigans on top of not being able to attack, which is huge. And then that also enables us to hold this Fatal Push for another creature. Additionally, this Fatal Push is really big for Jarsil, right? We've already got Saint Elender plus Sorin, so, the next best thing to look for off these Assemble the Teams in hand is probably Jarsil, and having Fatal Push as a way to double up on that first trigger is pretty huge, so very good start for us. I think being on the play made a really big difference in this game. So turn 3 here, opponent doesn't have anything they can really do with the Psychic Frog, and we have a lot of pressure in play, which is pretty huge. So they lead on Fragment Reality, which gives us a Jarsil. So obviously we lose the Elender, which does kind of limit our ability to snowball the game a little bit, but now we've got Jarsil. We've got this Fatal Push here, which we can't really double up on unless the opponent plays another creature here, really. And then they push the token, and it's kind of weird. Historic is still in a place where, opponent just goes for the early scoop up. But yeah, Historic's still in a place where some decks just can't trigger Revolt for Fatal Push very easily, which is kind of weird to me. But anyway, sideboarding here, so we're not 100% sure what we're up against here, really. We're against Esper. We know the color combination, obviously, but we don't really know what the opponent is on, whether it's like an Oculus mid-range deck, or whether they're running Elender themselves. So without really seeing much, I don't want to sideboard too heavily. I do think I probably want Abrupt Decays, though, just because if they're not on Elender, they know that we are, and they can obviously bring a Needle there. So I think having 3 copies is good. Also because we know they're on Psychic Frog. Being an Esper, they could also be on stuff like Diviner of Fate, potentially, Felia and Overlord, so Abrupt Decay has a lot of good targets in this matchup. So, opponent is on Thoughtseize, very happy that we've kept to 7. I think this hand is pretty Thoughtseize resistant here. I think it's going to be hard for the opponent not to take the Jarsil here, because whatever they take outside of that, we're going to be able to flash back with the Jarsil. So, I think opponent does take a while here, but they end up taking the Abrupt Decay, so that signals to me pretty heavily that they have a creature they want to protect here. And lo and behold, they got the Psychic Frog, which, makes a ton of sense. We do draw and Assemble the Team off the top, which is pretty huge. I think we're just going to go for that here and just try and find the Saint Elender, which we do find here. And now we're in a great spot, because if the opponent taps out, well, I get not necessarily in a great spot, because if they are playing more of a tempo deck with counter spells, we could be in trouble here, because, we've just got a hand where we're just going to be jamming 3 drops every single turn. So if they do find an answer... if they do have a counterspell for one of these, they can just keep drawing with Psychic Frog every single turn, which would be a big issue. So the Inquisition take away the Sorin. That still leaves us with the Jarsil, but if they end up passing with 2 mana open here, that is a concern. But they thankfully just jam the Psychic Frog here, which is good. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a Fatal Push in the yards, so we're not going to be able to answer the Psychic Frog here, but we do have Abrupt Decay in the graveyard, so if Jarsil does survive the turn cycle, we will be able to take out at least one of these. And then past that, if Jarsil gets to 3 loyalty, we can then recast the Sorin, which then enables us to get this Elender in play here. So I ended up going for a land off the Abundant Harvest, just because I feel like with the hand we've got at the moment, we do want to keep hitting land drops, right? We want to be able to pillage the bog into a 2-drop, or cast a Jarsil, I think it's really important at this kind of spots when we have, a 2-drop and 2/3 drops in hand to just keep hitting lands, basically. I did consider blocking here just to, limit the card advantage they get and force them to discard a couple if they want to kill the Jarsoul here, but I think our game plan here is to just try and rely on this Jarsoul, right? Use the Jarsoul to use Abrupt Decay on the Psychic Frog, then recast the Sorin. So opponent Thought Seizes here. I think, they're obviously thinking about me possibly recasting the Sorin, which is why they end up taking the Elender here, which makes sense. So Hushbringer does shut off Elender, but it's not the priority here. I think Psychic Frog is a much bigger threat. And so here I like getting Fatal Push and just taking out both the Psychic Frogs here because, Psychic Frog is just way more powerful than Hushbringer, and we're not in a massive rush to take out this Hushbringer. We don't really have a clear way. Well, I guess now, if this Jarsoul survives, we will have a clear way to get Sorin into Elender, but, we could just minus the Sorin, put an Elender into play, not get the trigger, and just try and ride that to victory. We could hold on to the Sorin, recast Sorin with Jarsoul, and then use the Jarsoul to kill Hushbringer with Fatal Push. So Abhorrent Oculus is a concern here for sure. So now we've got a couple of options. I think leading on Thoughtseize makes sense because that doesn't really change what we do here. And I think the options that we've got here are either to use Jarsoul to recast Sorin, put Elender into play, don't get the trigger, and then try and race Elender versus Oculus. I'm not sure that's the best line, but the alternative is pre-combat, run out a second Jarsoul here, and then use Fatal Push to kill the Oculus. So it's interesting they don't use Fragment Reality here, which is definitely what we're going to take, I think. And then I do end up going for the Sorin here, which looking back on it, I really don't know if I like this line. So I do end up putting the Elender into play, but, we're already going down to 2 here. We, might need to pay 1 for the Confluence. So unfortunately, the opponent obviously hit well with the Oculus there. And had we gone Jarsoul into push, we could have killed the Oculus. So I do think I potentially punted that game by not running out the second Jarsoul, taking out the Oculus, and then, we could have then potentially used Abrupt Decay on the Hushbringer or the Oculus next turn. So looking back at that play now, that was incredibly short-sighted of me because I think the reason why I didn't want to run out the second Jarsoul there was because we miss out on getting Sorin that turn. But getting Sorin that turn isn't even that big, and if that second Jarsoul does survive, we go push the first Oculus, decay the Hushbringer if the token isn't anything good, but we obviously saw that the token was another Oculus. Then we could have just used Abrupt Decay on that second Oculus and then got Sorin back potentially, and then we could have run out the other Jarsoul. So looking back on that, I do think we could have potentially won that game. Obviously the opponent having 2 Oculuses does mean they probably could have gotten for a lot of damage, but looking back on it, I do think we have a much, much better chance if we run out the second Jarsoul there. So, putting in the tank about sideboarding, just going to edit it and we'll get into game 3. Okay, so going into game 3 here, being on the play is huge, and this hand is a little bit awkward. We don't have a 1-drop to recast with Jarsoul. We also don't really want to be drawing our 1 of Fragment Insurance against the Fragment Reality deck, right? Definitely going to keep this hand, though. We are pretty soft to Thoughtseize on Assemble the team, which is a little bit rough, and they do have the Thoughtseize, which is a concern, but I think the opponent is in a... it's a greedy line for them to take Assemble here, right? I think they probably have to take Sorin, right? They end up taking Jarsoul, though, which... bells start ringing when they start doing that. It makes me think they must have another discard spell here. Or Pithing Needle, for example. So they do have the second Thoughtseize, which makes sense. They take the Jarsoul, and then they have the Pithing Needle as well. So now we're kind of in trouble here. The opponent's early interaction is lined up very well against our hand here, but, we've got a lot of decent draws. If we find Jarsoul, that's great. If we find a way to dig for Jar, so that's great. We end up drawing Abrupt Decay, which is just the perfect card here, though. So we did end up getting pretty lucky in this spot, to be fair. And I think it makes much more sense to hold the Sorin here and just go for Abrupt Decay. The end of the turn, we could have obviously run out the Sorin here, but if they had a way to kill it, or they had another discard spell to get rid of Abrupt Decay, that would be a real issue. So now we can just Abrupt Decay the Pithing Needle. The opponent's tapped out here, so we don't have to worry about counter spells either. We could Abundant Harvest for land, but if we hit another fast land, that's an absolute disaster. And considering we're empty-handed, I think it makes a lot more sense to just hold on to the Harvest here. So we could obviously Faith Fetters the Tamiyo, but, you know, Tamiyo is a pretty slow card in this sort of situation. I think it makes more sense to just get the Cleric down, which then enables us to potentially kill the Tamiyo with the Helix mode next turn. So the opponent is on Diviner of Fates, which is good to know. If they don't, okay, so I was going to say, if they don't ditch a non-land, we can kill the Diviner of Fates here. Either way, I think we want to be taking out the Tamiyo, right? That is a card that, you know, especially if they flip it, which they do seem to have quite a lot of card draw in their deck, they can start rebuying stuff from the graveyards. So we'll use the Harvest now to get a non-land, and we hit an Assemble the Team, which is pretty nice. Let's see what we hit here. So I think the two cards I'm considering here are either Thoughtseize or either Thoughtseize or Abrupt Decay. Croxer can actually be a card that I do consider in spots like this where it's kind of grindy, the opponent's on a low life total, but Croxer is just terrible when they have a Diviner of Fates in play, because any card that they discard, they get another card of the same card type off the Diviner. So I think it just makes sense to get the Abrupt Decay here. So yeah, we did get pretty lucky game 3, but if we'd played better game 2, we might have been able to win that game anyway. Okay, so going into round 4 here at 3-0, which is great, and we're on the play here, but we have a 1-lander, which is pretty awkward, without Harvest anyway. And then I like keeping this 6 for short, and I think I'm going to put back a land here, because I think we're pretty likely to find another land before our third land drop anyway, and worst comes to worst, even if we miss next turn, we can just Harvest for a land to guarantee the third land for Jarsel. So here, straight away we see against the Orzhov Sorin deck, and I think we just have to take Overlord here, right? Because if we take if we take Fatal Push, doesn't really do much. They don't have a way to trigger Revolt, and we've only got Jarsel as a creature that we really care about with Fatal Push. If we take either Sorin or Dollmaker, they can just get it back with the Overlord, and you know, then they've got the Overlord in play for Dollmaker to bounce it with. So getting another Thoughtseize there was huge, but they do take away the Jarsel. So now we're both basically at the mercy of the top of their deck. And, you know, mid-range mirrors can end up like this quite a lot. So just going to come down to who draws best, I guess. Right, they're going to hold on to the Dollmaker to blink Overlord with. They're going to hold on to the Sorin to play in case they draw in a Lender. And now we get Jarsel, which is a huge, huge top deck here. So thankfully, opponent doesn't have a way to trigger Revolt, so we can just flash back the Thoughtseize here. And wow, they have Sorin double Elender, so them missing the land drop there was huge. Me drawing the Jarsel there was huge as well. It's a little bit awkward that we don't have anything to flash back with the second intensity of Jarsel, but the fact the opponent preemptively answered it there is huge. Then we get Pillage the Bog, so now we have Sorin Elender. As long as the opponent doesn't find a discard effect here, we should be good to get our combo off first, which is pretty big. Definitely not game over though, because if the opponent does happen to draw a Sorin off the top here and then Faith's Fetters the Elender, that could be pretty awkward for us. Especially because they also have Dollmaker to blink their Elender, which enables them to, gives them another angle to be able to go over the top of us. Here we just go for Inspiring Cleric for sure. You could maybe consider Ritual of Rejuvenation here to try and find another discard effect maybe, but I think it just makes more sense to just apply as much pressure as possible. I also like that we have the Helix mode available to us by sacrificing the Cleric here. So opponent finds another land, which is huge. We just need to hope the opponent just whiffs off the top of their deck, because, this Elender does win the game very, very quickly. So now we get an 8-8 in play. Opponent kind of needs Sorin off the top to even stand a chance here. And unfortunately, they do find it, which is pretty rough. But, we should be kind of grateful they didn't find it last turn. I think that would have made a much bigger difference. So see what they get here. Presumably it'll be Faith's Fetters on Elenda or our 8/8. And thankfully they don't have enough mana to also blink the Elenda with the Dollmaker. That would have been even more rough, I think. So opponent gets the 4/4. We're going to push that straight away. And then we draw a land off the top, which obviously isn't ideal, but we've got a good few options here. So we could either attack both creatures at Sorin to kill it, but we could obviously use the Sorin to give Inspiring Cleric Death Touch and a +1/+1 counter. I end up just attacking with the Elenda, which I'm not sure I love here. Like the idea here is if they block with their own Elenda, we can use the Sorin to sacrifice the Inspiring Cleric and kill theirs. But that line is only really better if they make a mistake, right? If they block with the Elenda, then that's the only reason it's better. Looking back on it, I think I'm better off just plussing on the Inspiring Cleric, giving it Death Touch and Lifelink, attacking Sorin with both, which basically achieves the same thing, except we also get in for another 5 lifelinking damage, and we would end up with a 9/9 instead of a 4/4. Now, the downside of that is that it does leave Sorin vulnerable to attacks, but the opponent didn't have anything in play to attack it anyway, so... And now... that kind of matters here, right? Because we could potentially be attacking with an 8/8 here if we'd got in with the Inspiring Cleric, and obviously we'd be at 5 higher life, which can end up making a difference in these sorts of scenarios. So drawing lands in a row here is pretty rough. I don't think we have good attacks here, really, right? If we attack with the Elenda to try and get another token, they can just double block, and then we just lose the Elenda and don't gain anything here. So I think it just makes sense to ship it back. Again, both of us seem to be kind of struggling. It's not just us that are struggling with lands off the top. Abundant Harvest is great, though, because that gives us another card to find, and then we end up getting Elenda, which is probably the worst draw in the deck. It's like the only uncastable card. That, you know, even Sorin here would be good, because it enables us to start activating its abilities again. So... we do draw an Abrupt Decay off the top, but again, that doesn't really do much here. And I think, remembering back on this game, I do end up making a pretty big mistake here of just running out the Juggernaut. Which, you know, I think my thought was, okay, it's another threat on the board, but if nothing, if the same sort of thing happens again, there's sort of this impasse here. We're just going to be forced to attack this Juggernaut straight into Saint Elenda. And this is also kind of a spot where Abrupt Decay not hitting bigger things is awkward, because, you know, I don't expect it to be able to hit a 7-mana Saint Elenda, but if it could hit a 4-mana Faith's Fetters and get our Sorin back online again, that would be a pretty huge deal. So we do draw Thoughtseize off the top, which is nice. Enables us to get rid of... Okay, we see they have another Elenda, but if they'd only had one Elenda, it makes Sorin less of a good top deck, I guess, because... you know, they can still plus it on the Elenda that they've currently got in play, but Dollmaker blinking Elenda makes it non-legendary, so they could potentially have 2 Elendas in play, which would be absolutely backbreaking. It is actually pretty annoying for us that they do have another Elenda, because if they draw another land drop, which they do, they can just jam another Elenda, and then they got 2 in play. So, yeah, kind of frustrating to lose this game, because we're basically 100% to win, assuming the opponent doesn't draw Sorin that exact turn. But, you know, this is the risk you run running a deck that is super reliant on discard effects. You know, you're always going to be vulnerable to the opponent drawing well. And it does kind of suck to keep drawing lands here, but, you know, that's the advantage of running counter spells over discard spells. You can actually answer what they draw off the top. So, if I remember correctly, unsurprisingly, we do end up losing this one. I think you can see how. And this is the other awkward thing about this deck a little bit, is you kind of need to play it like a tempo deck, sort of, whereby you need to manufacture the game to a point where Elenda can solo. If the opponent goes over the top of that, you basically have no way to win. So you are pretty reliant on your discard spells, but it works out pretty well for the most part, because if we can get Elenda down early and we back it up with interaction and discard spells. That's usually good enough. But, you know, like I said, if your interaction doesn't line up quite that well, or the opponent draws really well off the top, those are the two main ways that the opponent is capable of beating you, basically. So going into game 2 here, I don't actually like sideboarding against the Orzhov decks very much because I feel like our game plan is pretty well set up and there's not too much out the sideboard that we really want. Most matchups I do like having a decent number of Abrupt Decays, but that's mainly as a concession to Pithing Needle because any deck can bring a Needle against you, but obviously in the mirror, opponent's not going to bring a Needle because they're also running Sorin. So, bit of an awkward, start having to mull down to 5 again, especially because the opponent is likely to be bringing extra discard effects against us. But we do have Sorin and Elenda, and we do find a third land off Pillage the Bog, which is huge. So we just got to hope to fade Juggernaut Peddler here, which we do. I'm not going to play around Mana Tithe, just going to jam the Sorin here, get Elenda down. They could obviously have Fragment Reality here, but, we still get a Jarsel or a Croxer at worst. And if the opponent doesn't know that we are running Jarsel, which I think they should at this point. Okay, they go for Heartless Act. But I've had multiple opponents who... multiple opponents who will fragment Elenda immediately, which then also gives you a Jarsel trigger before combat. If the opponent knows you're on Jarsel, then they should wait until just after combat so you don't get a trigger, basically. So we're going to go for Assemble here, and I think we're probably just going to go for Jarsel. We could have gone for an Elenda, but chances of this Sorin surviving are pretty low. Okay, so we have to take the Overlord here. And the nice thing about Break Expectations, in this spot it doesn't really matter because Overlord can't get additional copies of Overlord. But if we were in a situation where we had to take like a Sorin here, right? Say this Noxious Grasp was a Sorin, for example, then exiling it is a pretty big deal because the opponent can't just go Overlord Rebite immediately. So, presumably the opponent's just going to attack down the Sorin here, which is a shame to lose, but, with the cards we know they don't really have great stuff they can do. Obviously, if we go for Jarsel, then they can use Dollmaker to blink Apparition to get rid of it. But we are going to be flashing back a discard spell with Jarsel, which will, if they haven't drawn anything great, enable us to preemptively get rid of the Dollmaker, which then shuts that off as a line for them. So we could lead with Pillage to try and find a land, but in this spot I'd rather wait and hold Pillage to use next turn if possible. Unfortunately, they end up having 2 Dollmakers here, which is pretty rough. And I ended up taking the Noxious Grasp over the Saint Elenda, which I'm not sure I love here, really, because they already have an answer for Jarsel, right? They can just use Dollmaker to blink the Apparition no matter what I do here. So in this instance, I'm a little bit confused why I didn't just take the Elenda here, because it just shuts off Sorin as a top deck. Because this just Jarsel is dying this turn regardless, so I guess my 2 routes to victory from this point are Jarsel and Elenda, and Noxious Grasp answers both. So maybe my thought process at the moment was I'm probably not beating a top deck Sorin anyway. I don't know. I'll have to think about it again. But either way, we jam the Pillage here just to try and see more cards deep, basically. And again, I would love to find a Jarsel here. I think I end up picking just up another Pillage the Bog to try and set up again for next turn, because nothing else was really that great. We could have gone for Break Expectations, but then we're just completely out of gas, right? We need help off the top. Again, didn't hit great there, really. We are basically looking for Jarsel at this point, because Jarsel, again, helps us flash back a discard spell, get rid of that Elenda, and then hopefully use the recast, Assemble, or Pillage to then try and find Sorin and Elenda again. So we do find the Jarsel this time, which is pretty big. Opponent does have mana available, but they don't have enough for Spike, Pit Trap, and, even if they take... even if they have Fragment Reality, we get Croxer. So the only card we're really concerned about is another Heartless Act here. I guess... Oh, they also don't have a way to trigger Revolt for Fatal Push, right? Because they can crack the Treasure Chest here, but it's 4 mana to do, so it would just wipe out their entire mana. So Thankfully, we do get the Jostler discard off, which is really nice here. They have another Dollmaker, so snap off the Signal Ender here. So we did end up, it did end up actually working out, taking the Noxious Grasp. So looking back on it, maybe that was a better line. Maybe I kind of did think, okay, for us to pull ahead here, I need another Jostler. And so preemptively answering that is just gives us a solid way of doing that. And they do actually have the Sorin here, so very lucky that we managed to get rid of the Signal Ender this turn. But I do feel pretty good about this spot now, right? We've got assemble the team in the graveyards and a draw step. So, you know, if we draw Sorin or Elender off the top, chances of us being able to just assemble the combat out of nowhere are pretty high. And obviously assemble or pillage at this point, now we have 6 lands in play, is going to be able to hopefully find us whatever we need. And also, since we have Sorin in the graveyard, we can just use assemble or pillage to try and find an Elender, hope that Jostler survives, and then, we can recast Sorin with the Jostler itself, which is pretty nice. So opponent just runs out the Dollmaker here. They can... they end up blinking the Jostler, which is pretty heads-up play because it resets it to 1 intensity. Keep drawing lands off the top, which obviously isn't ideal here, but it does give us an opportunity to now get rid of Sorin again. And they have 2 Sorins here, so... I think it's probably better to take the Dollmaker. I can't actually remember what I go for in this spot. You know, I could understand going for Sorin here because if we draw another discard spell, it shuts them off their main ability. But, okay, yeah, I do go for the Dollmaker. I think the main reason there is just that, you know, if they top deck an Elender, this single discard spell doesn't shut them off Sorin. So, we don't need to worry about that because we can't really beat that. But if we take the Dollmaker here, it makes Overlord a way worse top deck. And I'm going to hold on to the Blood Crypt here. I don't think there's any downside of holding onto a land. And I'm going to set stops during the opponent's turn to just bluff interaction here, right? Because if they think we've got a removal spell, they're less likely to, be aggressive here. They do crew up the Colossal Plow, which they got off Break Expectations, which isn't something that ever happened in testing, I'm not going to lie. Does enable them to get an extra 3 mana here, which does enable them to, use the Pit Trap or the Treasure Chest. So opponent using Colossal Plow into Pit Trap. This is one of the few games where the spellbook cards do end up actually coming up here. So opponent just runs out the Sorin, presumably just plus. I mean, they probably should have done this main phase 1, right? Just to gain an extra bit of life, but... So unfortunately we don't draw very well off the top. I guess what we're looking for here is just, Jostler would be good again. Abrupt Decay would be pretty nice as well because taking out Skyclave Apparition to get us another token would be pretty nice. But having said that, they do have 2 Dollmakers that can give it indestructible, so not sure how big that is. So opponent peddlers us. Obviously, we've just got a land in hand, so that doesn't end up mattering. And we just draw Break Expectations here, so we do get to get rid of the second Sorin, but I don't think there's really much point in doing that because if they draw a Elender, they can just put it into play anyway. They presumably don't run any other vampires, so Sorin, this second Sorin is basically just dead in their hands. So, I mean, it's probably a mistake to get rid of Weapon Rack, actually thinking about it, because Weapon Rack is one of the worst cards they can get. Ginger Brute is an upgrade for them there, really. But I think at this point, I'm pretty much just consigned to we're very likely to lose this game, right? Even if we find Jostler, I think it's probably too slow here. So yeah, we got 1 draw step, but I don't think there's anything that saves us here, unfortunately. So end up losing round 4, which is a bit of a shame, but still 3-1, not a bad record. Okay, so going into round 5 with 3-1 on the play, and this hand looks really solid to me. As long as we find our 3rd land drop, this is great, right? We can get Expectations on 1, and then just try and jam Sorin on 3. So up against a Lotus deck, obviously could be a few things, but we see straight away that it's Mardu mid-range, Mardu Sacrifice rather, and I think it makes most sense to get rid of the Bombardment. That's the card that I'm most worried about personally. I feel like Ajani and Marionette Apprentice are both powerful cards, but they don't really do much without Sacrifice outlets alongside them, whereas Bombardment is great, obviously with Ajani, but also with Apprentice as well. So I think it just makes most the most sense to get rid of that. Plus, Bombardment is pretty good against our proactive game plan as well. If they have a Bombardment in play the same turn that we go Sorin into Elender, they can obviously ping down the Sorin before it gets a chance to start plussing on future turns. And also, they can chump block your Elender and sacrifice it in response to deny you the life gain and the tokens as well. So, Bombardment definitely the most scary card from their side. So, very glad to snipe it on turn 1 with a break there. Obviously, we didn't get to see what other 1-drops they were running, so they could have Thoughtseize of their own, but I think most likely, you know, most of the main decks of Mardu, their 1-drops are just creatures like Trapfinder, like Unlucky Witness. So another Sorin off the top, and now I'm splitting a little bit. If we miss a third land here, you know, if we draw another Jostler or Sorin, this is just going to be, you know, one of those hands where, you know, if we find the third land on curve, you've got a really, really solid chance against Mardu because, you know, the big difference here compared to maybe the 4-color Samwise deck is that Mardu relies on chip damage to win. So if you can get an Elender down early, it's really difficult for them to beat. Whereas against 4-color Samwise, you can jam an Elender, and if the opponent can find the combo, you still lose, right? Because it's, you know, it's obviously infinite. So I do remember this player, you know, was very thoughtful about their decisions, took a while, so I am probably going to edit this match a little bit more than usual, just so that we don't have to wait for a while. So very interesting that they go for a swamp here. Makes me think they must have, you know, like a Deadly Dispute or a Corrupted Conviction, you know, a sacrifice outlet of some kind. But that doesn't really affect how we play this out, right? It's annoying to draw a Harvest rather than a land, but, you know, the fact we finally got the third land is a big deal here. And we can at least go for Sorin next turn. Obviously, they could have Juggernaut Peddler, they could have Thoughtseize to take away the Elender, but, you know, we still have Jostler as a viable option as well. So Static Prison is definitely something that we need to be wary of, right? That's a potential out to Elender once we do get it in play. We do have Abrupt Decay in the main deck, but, you know, it's only a one-of, really. Having said that, though, they don't have a Guide of Souls out, so, you know, Static Prison is likely to only last a couple of turns. So after being in the tank for a while, they end up just jamming the Bombardment here and not using either of the cards they hit off the Village Rites, which is pretty huge for us. But either way, even though we, you know, miss land drops for a couple turns, we can now just go Sorin into Elender, invoke the Divine the Bombardment, and then we should be in a really good position from here, especially because we've got Fatal Push and Jostler available as well. Not to mention the second Elender, the second Sorin, which is a big deal here because the life gain really matters in this matchup, and so the ability to, you know, use the Sorin to give the 4/4 token lifelink and death touch also means it's more difficult for them to deny us the life gain, right? Because they don't have a free sacrifice outlet that they could, you know, double block, sacrifice both before damage is dealt sort of thing. So I feel pretty good about this spot, right? I don't think there's much they can really do here. It was obviously rough for the opponent that they kind of wasted. I guess it wasn't the Village Rites. It was the Unlucky Witness triggers that they didn't use. But either way, I feel pretty good here, right? We're at 20 life. We've got an Elender in play. We've got Fatal Push. We've got Jostler. We've got Croxer. So just going to lead on the Jostler here because getting rid of Ajani is a very big deal. Now, if this was Thoughtseize, I think we just have to snap off on Chthonian Nightmare because if we discarded anything else, they could just get it back with the Chthonian Nightmare. Break Expectations Exiles, so I can understand the logic of going for Ajani here because even if they don't have a sack outlet, they can just run it out and kind of just stop us attacking. Although we do have the Fatal Push in hand to counteract that. So looking back at it now, actually, I think it's probably correct to go after the Chthonian Nightmare in this spot because I don't really actually feel that threatened by Ajani here unless they happen to go, you know, land into top deck Bombardment. So I think that was probably a misplay on my part looking back on it now. But I don't think it'll make it an enormous difference here, really. I guess the other advantage of taking Ajani there is that it does slow down their ability to commit to the board here, right? Because if we take Chthonian Nightmare, if they have the fourth land, they can go Marionette Apprentice into Ajani, get a lot of Guide of Souls triggers, and then they're dealing us chip damage. But basically overall, I think I would rather save this Fatal Push for a Guide of Souls or a Marionette Apprentice if possible. But, Chthonian Nightmare is also a card that is incredibly good in these sorts of games. Where it's grindy and even though we have a combo in the deck, it's not an infinite combo, so we still have, a pretty fair game plan overall, I would say. So we're running out the Croxer first here, just so that we can recast it off the Jarsel. Now, again, this is kind of another situation where the Spellbook from Break Expectations has given them more cards to be able to discard here. So another little bit of non-synergy, but, Croxer is mainly here as a one-of for Fragment Reality, so it doesn't, we're not going to end up in situations where we draw it that often, really. So opponent discards the Gingerbrute, unsurprisingly. And I'm just going to send in with everything here, I think. Because we want to be able to use Fatal Push either on the Marionette Apprentice or the Guide of Souls. So it looks like the opponent does have Fragment Reality, which is a little bit awkward here because we don't have Croxer in the deck anymore, so that's guaranteed to hit Jarsel, which obviously Legend rules itself. So here, interesting whether we prioritize the 3 damage over recasting a 1-drop. I'm kind of surprised that I did that again. So looking back on it, I do think I made a few misplays this game for sure, because the only card that we can recast currently off Jarsel is Invoke the Divine, which is, if they have another Bombardment, that'll be great, but, they can obviously use the Bombardment to take out the Jarsel before we get to Invoke the Divine. And obviously it can take out Chthonian Nightmare as well, but the chances of the opponent just leaving Chthonian Nightmare in play without activating it is pretty low. Maybe if they're worried about a discard spell, maybe if they want to protect from Croxer, for example, but yeah, looking back on it, I think I should have just kept the Jarsel in play that was on 1, because, especially with Fatal Push, right, we can go Fatal Push, double up, take out both Apprentices, take out Guide of Souls. Okay, so they do have Guide of Souls that they hit off the Trap Finder. Now the question is, do we care more about the Guide of Souls or the Marionette Apprentice? I think, remembering it, I end up going after the Guide of Souls. I'm still not 100% sure if that's the best line or not. In the comments, definitely let me know if you disagree and why, because I was, kind of umming and ahhing about this one. Presumably they just play the Chthonian Nightmare and can get back the Guide of Souls with the Chthonian Nightmare, which definitely influences my decision on what the best line is there, right? If we preemptively take out the Marionette Apprentice, they can just get it back and they get an extra token off it as well. Okay, so they run out of land in Chthonian Nightmare, so they're completely empty-handed now. They obviously can and presumably will use the Chthonian Nightmare to get back another creature, maybe a Guide of Souls or maybe another sacrifice outlet here. Which does mean that they're likely to end the turn with Chthonian Nightmare in hand, which does mean that we can get rid of it with Croxer, which is pretty nice. Oh, actually, looking back at the graveyard, I completely forgot that Sorin was in the yard. Okay, so that makes more sense why I chose to keep the Jarsel on 3 a little bit, I guess. But we don't have an Elender in hand, so I still think it would have been better to keep the Jarsel that was on 1 intensity, but I can understand a little bit more, maybe, why I went for... why I kept the 3 intensity 1. Now this turn, I think I made a pretty big mistake. So my 2 options here are escape Croxer, get rid of Chthonian Nightmare, and then we're kind of dead to Bombardment off the top, but, I don't think we can really afford to play around that. So we get the Sorin back here and attack first just to see what they do. Right, this is lethal. They will have to chump block with the Unlucky Witness. And then we get the information of what they hit off that. And then the 2 options I've got here is escape Croxer, get rid of the Chthonian Nightmare. But we were in trouble if they find Goblin Bombardment, because, they'll attack for 3 in the air. They'll take we're taking 2 off the unlucky witness dying, puts us down to 7. We're taking 3 in the air, puts us down to 4. And then, bombardment off the top would do it. And then they find the bombardment. So this really puts a spanner in the works, because I really was planning on just escaping the Croxer here. But them finding bombardment off the unlucky witness really messes things up. So in this situation, I think I'm kind of forced to go for Assemble the Team. Try and find an Elender, which we don't find, unfortunately. I think I make a pretty big misplay here, actually, looking back on it. I don't know why I didn't just get another Assemble the Team. And then we get another big look at a Lender. Because if we go for a Lender here, we can Faith Fetters the Marionette Apprentice, stop it attacking, gain 4, go up to 11. And then we're pretty much stabilized, I think. We have, they'll obviously have bombardment, but being at 11 is pretty safe. We still have Jarsel that can dig us towards an answer, potentially. So, looking back on it now, I don't understand why I didn't just go assemble, try and find a Lender. I guess at that point, I guess the logic is, for taking Abrupt Decay can answer Bombardment, it can also answer Apprentice, and if I don't find a Lender off the second assemble, then I'm basically just dead. But I think we can't afford to play around that, really. I think we have to, hope to hit that Elender off the second assemble. So I definitely think I've made a few mistakes this game, and if I had gone for the second assemble, the chances of us finding an Elender are incredibly high, even though our deck size has gotten a bit smaller than it was at the start of the game. I think chances were in our favour of finding it off the first one, which we obviously didn't find, but then, looking another 20, 30 cards deep, well, I guess it would be around 20 now, should be good enough to guarantee the Elender. So here we take out the Marionette Apprentice, which, but basically just to deny them an extra death trigger here, but they can get back Marionette Apprentice again. They've got a lot of options. They've got a lot of potential drain, which is quite scary. This puts us down to 5. They get another Apprentice back in play. They can attack us down to 4. And then they still have enough mana to go for another Chthonian Nightmare trigger as well. So end up losing this one. And I think we would have been winning this if we find an Elender this turn. So I think picking Decay over Assemble the Team was definitely a misplay on my part. And I do think that would have made a very big difference here. So unfortunately, opponent will just go Chthonian Nightmare, sacrifice, put us down to 3, get another creature into play, and then attack us down to 2. Oh, attack us down to 1 even, because, I forgot they can get back Guide of Souls with haste and then just deal us lethal this turn. So actually, having said that, we probably would have been dead even with a Lender, so maybe it wouldn't have made a difference, but still. So sideboarding here, we definitely want the Stone of Urek. We want extra Abrupt Decays for sure as well, I think. So I can't remember exactly how I sideboarded, but looking back on it now, I think we need the Needle, we need the third Decay, and then we can trim on some discard effects, which are still very nice with Jarsel, but not super important here. I think, one of the big strengths of Mardu is you are pretty resilient to discard. Obviously, you are a deck that does revolve around synergy quite a lot, but you also have a lot of very powerful standalone cards. You got Amped Raptor, you got Journey, you got Goblin Bombardment. So I do want to have some discard spells in because, that alongside Jarsel is a really powerful way to just disrupt the opponent, particularly against decks that are running engine cards like Goblin Bombardment. But for the most part, I think we're much better off with hate cards like Stone of Urek, Abrupt Decay, that really shut off a big portion of their deck or can answer their engine cards. Okay, so going into game 2 here, we're going to be on the play, which is huge. And I do think this is definitely a matchup which significantly improves for us post-sideboard because, mainly because of Stone of Urek, but Pithing Needle, Abrupt Decay, also very good cards in this matchup. So this is definitely a keep here. And we'll put back Pillage the Bog here. Really hoping to naturally draw the third land so that we can assemble for Saint Elender here. And now this hand is pretty resilient to Thoughtseize as well. So thankfully we do find the third land, so we're just looking for Elender here. Unfortunately, we don't find it, which is a little bit unlucky, but we already have the second Assemble the Team here. So I think I think it makes sense to go for Fatal Push here, because then we can go Fatal Push plus assemble the team next turn, because we already have this Guide of Souls in play. If the opponent didn't have a Guide of Souls in play, I probably would have gone for a Thoughtseize instead here. But I don't think it makes sense going for Abrupt Decay when we really want to double spell next turn, right? We really want to assemble the team because we want to set up for Sorin plus Elender the following turn. So obviously getting another 1 mana card makes sense. And with Guide in play, I think that makes the most sense. So opponent runs out Marionette Apprentice, so pretty reasonable start from the opponent here. You know, they're very close to triggering Guide of Souls, which is, you know, always scary. Thankfully, we do have the Fatal Push. Unfortunately, we can't play the Copperline Gorge if we want to double spell this turn, though. And we do find Saint Elender, which is huge, so we should be good to combo off next turn, assuming the opponent doesn't have Pithing Needle or a discard effect. And I think we'll pass. I think we'll wait for them to commit to a creature first before killing the Guide of Souls. And I think there is maybe an argument to taking an extra damage here and holding on to the Fatal Push to see what they cast. But I think my logic is I'm going to be taking out the Guide of Souls anyway. I don't think that removing the Guide of Souls really affects what they're likely to play here. Might be wrong about that, though. But I don't think it's worth taking an extra damage unnecessarily against a deck that is all about chip damage, right? So they have Ghost Vacuum and Bombardment, but thankfully we have Sorin into Elender now, and we can use the Elender to take out the Bombardment. And we have a follow-up Sorin to start gaining us even more life here. So take out the Bombardment. Presumably they take out the Sorin here. Which they do, makes sense, pings it down. But we still go up to 17. We still get a 4/4 token. We've still got a 4/7 lifelinker that keeps generating us value every single turn. And we've got either Sorin or Jarsel follow-up play here. So I feel pretty confident about this spot. Ghost Vacuum is potentially good against Jarsel. And we do need to be wary about them potentially activating it as well, because they do have ramp off this Phyrexian Tower. I believe it's 6 mana, right? If I recall, but so they are actually pretty close to it at this point, which is kind of scary. So maybe prioritizing taking that out if we can might be a good idea. But having said that, they've only got a Guide of Souls underneath it at the moment, so it's not really doing that much. And there's a chance they might want to keep it sticking around. I guess the other nice thing about this as well is that Jarsel kind of forces them to use Ghost Vacuum on our graveyard rather than theirs, or it forces them to use the activation on instants and sorceries rather than creatures. So if they do get up to 6 mana, especially now they've got an additional treasure token, they won't be able to get, 3 or 4 creatures that quickly, or they have to let us start activating Jarsel, if that makes sense. So opponents in the tank here, obviously, quite an important turn. They do have the Static Prison, and unfortunately, they do have 2 spare energy as well, so chances of us getting that back, 4 turns is a really long time in Historic, so... And then they also have a Jarny, which is a little bit of a concern. And we draw another Jarsel, so now we're in trouble, because Sorin doesn't really do anything here. I mean, we can obviously plus it to make this 4/4 a lifelinker, but Jarsel is our best option here, and Ghost Vacuum, I mean, to be honest, because Jarsel doesn't target, there isn't really that much graveyard hate that's good against it, other than exactly Ghost Vacuum and Unlicensed Hearse, really. So, bit annoying they do have the Ghost Vacuum here, because if they have like a one-shot graveyard effect, like a Tormod script or whatever, we can rebuild fairly easily, especially because, we're running a lot of 1 mana interaction, so all we need is like a Harvest or a Thoughtseize or a push off the top to start triggering it. And just single target graveyard like Surgical Extraction isn't that good against Jarsel either, because if we have 2 different cards with the same mana value in our graveyard as Jarsel's Intensity, even if they surgical one of them, we still get to use the other, because the Jarsel, unlike Arcanist, Jarsel doesn't target, if that makes sense. So now they've got Chthonian Nightmare again, which is a bit annoying as well, because that also means that even if we did survive 4 turns now, they can start buffering the amount of energy they have with the Nightmare, meaning we're probably never going to get back this getting back this Elender unless we happen to draw Abrupt Decay. But they can Chthonian Nightmare, getting back Amped Raptor, which gives them a red permanent in play to get the damage trigger off the Ajani here. So I do feel like, this is one of those games where, the opponent had just lined up very well against us. If they didn't have exactly Static Prison on the Elender there, we've got the Elender in play. If they didn't have exactly Ghost Prison, then we could start using Jarsoul. So we thought he's here definitely going to take away the Lurus. And then, again, we have Jarsoul into Thoughtseize that I would love to use to be able to take away the Chthonian Nightmare, but this Ghost Vacuum is putting in work at the moment against us. We can obviously just jam the Sorin here, which does enable us to gain 4 life up to 16. But then we're just super vulnerable on the Crackback. We don't have any blockers. They can use the Ghost Vacuum to exile Lurus and then activate it next turn. So I think I like going for Jarsoul here. Force them to not utilize the Vacuum to get back a Lurus here, for example, which would be very good against us. And then I think I'd like attacking Ajani. It just gets a creature off the board. I guess it gets 2 creatures off the board, which I'm pretty happy about. But, I mean, I guess, again, the Thoughtseize doesn't really have that much of an impact because of the Chthonian Nightmare here. So, but again, had they not had the Ghost Vacuum, we could have double Thoughtseized. So, definitely in a rough spot here. I don't think there's really much we can do other than hope to draw Saint Elender here, really. If we draw Elender, we can go Sorin into Elender. Invoke the Divine Static Prison, get back another Elender. Then Faith's Fetters the Ajani is probably the best line. Or, you could maybe invoke the Ghost Vacuum as well if you're confident that you can attack down the Ajani maybe. So we're not completely dead here, really, right? If we can find a Saint Elender this turn, we do actually have a chance of turning this game completely around. But if we don't, we're pretty much just dead next turn. And Stone of Iraq, just too late. I mean, we can go Stone, Crack, deny them their graveyard, and then try and Fatal Push Lurus, but then we're still taking 4 off the attack, plus 3 off the Ajani at best, I mean. So yeah, I think we're pretty much just dead here, unfortunately. So, a little bit of a rough game. I do feel like this is a bit of an outlier in comparison to how the Mardu matchup normally goes, though. But, this is the risk you run playing what is at its core a mid-range deck, that you are going to have some games where the opponents, what they have just lines up well against what you have, right? Okay, so going into round 5 here, and we're 3-2, which is pretty rough because it means we have to win 4 in a row to make it now, but I still feel confident in the deck, and we're on the play here, which is pretty nice. I don't think we can afford to keep that, because if the opponent's not running a creature deck, we basically have nothing. This is obviously, not great either. I end up keeping this, which I think is a little bit sketchy, right? If they have a discard spell, we're in real trouble here, because, obviously we're pretty much out of gas. But again, if they did have a discard spell, we also get punished for going down to a 5-card hand as well. I imagine the opponent's going to take the Sorin here because, if they take Pillage the Bog and we just happen to draw Saint Elender off the top, then they're in real trouble. And they do end up doing that. And we do end up drawing Saint Elender off the top as well. So, kind of weird. So this is an interesting pick here as well. We don't have a 1-mana card to flash back with Jarsoul yet, but I still think it's a better pick than Thoughtseize because we have so many one mana cards that can then just make Jarsoul great again. Right, if we can draw a Thoughtseize or an Abundant Harvest off the top, then we can just use that, then use Jarsoul, flash it back, and then flash back the Pillage the Bog with 4 lands in play, hopefully find a Sorin. That feels like a better line to me. And we do get quite lucky finding Abundant Harvest. We want to make sure that we tap the Copperline Gorge so that if we draw a Thoughtseize, for example, we can cast that without needing to shock a land in, which is pretty nice. And we do find a symbol of the team, and then we find Sorin off that as well, which is huge. So obviously the opponent looks like they're on Orzhov, Sorin themselves, so just got to hope that they don't naturally have their own Sorin into Saint Elender here. But I feel pretty good now, considering we started off with a pretty empty hand and got hit by a discard spell. Unfortunately, they do have Juggernaut Peddler, so presumably they take the Sorin here. I can't remember exactly what they take, but unless they have a Thoughtseize as well, they kind of have to take the Sorin here, right? It kind of sucks to let me have the Jarsoul, but, it is what it is. And then the other great thing here is we can go Jarsoul, Then recast Abundant Harvest, naming non-land, which gives us one look at potentially getting a Sorin there. And then if it survives, we can potentially cast Assemble the Team, and then that gives us another, much better chance of finding the Sorin as well. So having Jarsil here is a really big deal. Unfortunately, though, the opponent has Ephemerate, which means that they can get rid of the Jarsil, which means we're pretty low on gas, but having 2 Saint Lenders in hand does mean that, any Sorin off the top is really nice. If we happen to naturally draw the 5th land, then we can, pillage the bog and Assemble the Team can potentially find Sorin as well. Not surprisingly, they take the Jarsil here, but that does also mean we do have 2 Juggernauts, so even if we do draw dead, or, don't draw anything great over the next couple turns, we can just run out Juggernauts, and if the opponent doesn't have any creatures, they're already down at 13, we could start applying pressure that way. Interesting they're running Vein Ripper as well. Kind of surprised about that. I guess Vein Ripper is pretty good against the sacrifice decks, and it just makes Sorin more consistent a little bit, I guess. So opponent goes for Thoughtseize here, and they end up taking the Juggernaut, which is funny. I don't think I've ever seen that before. And then they just ship it back. So they don't have many creatures. We can actually start getting in with the Juggernaut here. And drawing a land obviously isn't great here. We would much rather draw on, virtually anything else. But having a 5th land, like I said, is pretty nice because it does mean that if we draw Assemble the Team or Pillage the Bog off the top, we can potentially cast Sorin the same turn as well. So not in the best spot, but it does seem like the opponent has quite a slow hand here. It wouldn't surprise me if they have a hand full of Elenders and Vein Rippers, considering they're really not doing much, and we draw Break Expectations off the top, so I guess we're about to find out. So we get in with the Juggernaut. Unfortunately puts them down to 6, but if they end up paying for anything with the Silent Clearing, that puts them, dead on board, essentially. So we go for Great Expectations here. Break Expectations. And opponent has priority, and opponent has just got a hand full of Sorin targets. I think we just take the Eleshnorn here, right? Because that's the most castable out of them. And it does, with 2 Elenders in hand, if they can get an Eleshnorn down before we draw Sorin, we could be in trouble. Especially because we don't have anything that can kill Eleshnorn. Abrupt Decay doesn't do it. Fatal Push doesn't do it. So Eleshnorn is actually an issue if they do manage to cast it. But 5 mana is a lot, especially when they're having to crack one of their 3 lands to try and find more gas. They do find another land, though, and they do find Dedicated Dollmaker, which is a problem because, they can very easily find a Sorin off this mill here, even if they don't find, which they do, and even if they didn't find it there, they could still attack and then get another look at it. So we really need to find Sorin here, or, a way to find it. But thankfully, we do have, like I said, we've got Assemble the Team, we've got Pillage the Bog, Abundant Harvest could possibly get there as well. Unfortunately, we just draw a land off the top, so going to scoop it up because we know the opponent can just go Sorin in London next turn, and then we're just going to be too far behind. So that kind of sucks. So here, I think I actually realised that I sideboarded poorly in the previous match against White-Black Sorin, because the only 2 creatures that Fatal Push kills that we really care about are Felia, to stop them trying to blink Overlord and stuff like that, and Emperor of Bones, which we didn't see from the opponent. And considering they're running Vein Ripper, I'm not even sure that they're on Emperor of Bones necessarily. So I think it's much better to go for Abrupt Decay because that kills Sorin. It kills, any other potential hate cards they could bring in against us. And also Duress, their main line, as we've seen, especially because they've got Vein Rippers in addition to Elenders, using Duress to get Sorin out of their hand is a pretty big deal as well. Obviously not as good as Break Expectations because they can get it back with Overlord, but I do feel like Duress is probably better in this matchup than Fatal Push is. But anyway, just going to edit out and we'll get into game 2. Okay, so going into game 2 here, being on the plays is really huge, especially because of the discard spells. And this hand is solid, obviously assuming we find the 3rd land on curve, which we should do. With Abundant Harvest, we are essentially a 26 land deck, so this is an interesting hand from the opponent. We don't really care too much about Thoughtseize because we have a ton of different threats, right? If they Thoughtseize and take the Sorin, we still have the Jarsil. I think I like taking the Juggernaut Peddler here because they have the Ephemerate, right? If we take the Juggernaut Peddler, then the Ephemerate's also dead as well. So I feel like that's the best line. We don't really care about Vanishing Verse. It can take out Elender, but it can't take out Jostle, which is pretty big. And it does kind of leave the opponent in a bit of a conundrum here, where if they leave us with the Sorin, they kind of have to constantly hold up the Vanishing Verse to get rid of Elender to stop the token. But I think the opponent is kind of forced to take the Sorin there. And then we draw Assemble the Team, so I think we're just going to grab a land here, presumably. Maybe a fast land just to reduce damage, but I don't think it really matters too much in this matchup. This matchup normally comes down to either who can combo off first or just who pulls ahead on card advantage. You know, taking damage from your lands doesn't matter too much. Maybe we got punished for taking a fast land though, because we did draw a fast land off the top, but I don't think that's likely to matter too much. So now we can Thoughtseize, and I think we just take the Sorin here, because obviously Dollmaker is good if they draw Overlord, but Sorin into Elender is so much more of a tempo swing, and also they need 4 mana for Dollmaker, so I like that line. And then even if they do find Dollmaker, we're going to be getting Assemble the Team hopefully into a Sorin here, so we'll hopefully be ahead on board anyway. And then if we do have Sorin into Elender, we can use Invoke the Divine to to kill the Overlord if they do turn it into a creature. So unfortunately we don't find a Sorin here, which kind of sucks. I think I like going for Assemble the Team and just going again, right? Getting another look, and then I think statistically we're very likely to find it there. I think the only other card I'm considering here is maybe Thoughtseize, because then we can just run out Jarsil again. You know, if we get rid of the Dollmaker, then that shuts off Overlord. Although having said that, if we do use Thoughtseize, I guess we could use Break Expectations. Actually, yeah, if I'm planning to use Thoughtseize here to take Dollmaker, I should have used Break Expectations instead, because then if they draw Overlord off the top, if it's in their graveyard, they can just pull it back. But I might have also been using this Thoughtseize potentially to get rid of Vanishing Verse if I'm trying to set up Sorin into Elender, obviously. So we attack in here. I don't know what the opponent's considering. Okay, they had a Ganjo. I forgot about that. So yeah, I think it makes more sense to go for Thoughtseize here. So looking back on it now, I definitely should have taken the Break Expectations off the Assemble the Team instead to exile it. Because the reason we want to take Dollmaker there is so that it turns Overlord into a bad top deck, and they do actually draw it off the top, and we get punished for not taking the Break Expectations there, really. I think, maybe my thought process was we don't want to give them a card off the spellbook, but yeah, that was definitely a misplay on my part. Although having said that, they get the Dollmaker back, we're going to be casting Jarsil next turn anyway, right? Because, we can use Duress here to get rid of either Ephemerate or Vanishing Verse. Interesting that I chose to get rid of Ephemerate. I think looking back on it, I probably should have taken the Vanishing Verse, because we still want to try and set up Sorin into Elender, and if they're holding open Vanishing Verse, that does really limit the power of that. So opponent goes for Peddler, and they take Jarsil, which is interesting because we draw Sorin off the top anyway. But yeah, I think that's kind of risky for the opponent. I feel like they probably have to take the Elender there because we're very likely to find a Sorin off the Assemble the Team. And I like taking the second Sorin here because it means that if the first one gets killed somehow, then we have a backup to start using with the Elender in play. And then obviously if we draw Elender off the top, then we can just use it to put that in play as well. So we take out the Overlord here rather than going for the Inspiring Cleric, just because, again, it limits their top decks, right? If they drew Dollmaker off the top, that's a potential way that they could actually, stabilize against us somewhat. So yeah, I think it's more important to just shut off their good top decks there rather than try and apply pressure, because drawing Dollmaker off the top was probably their only out there if they had the Overlord in play. Okay, so going into game 3 here, obviously being on the draw is a disadvantage, but I found this matchup to be pretty good overall because a lot of their deck will go over the top of us if we don't interact with it, but a lot of their deck is synergy based, right? They need either Sorin plus Elender or Overlord plus Dollmaker, so discard spells is really effective at keeping them off that, which makes it much more likely that we'll be able to get our Sorin down first, and then, Saint Elender snowballs the game so quickly. So typically, we kind of want to approach this matchup like a tempo deck where we want to just keep them off their synergies, and then just be the first one to get Sorin into Elender down, and that usually just snowballs the game really quickly. So this is a really nice opening hand. We've got Thoughtseize into Pillage or Abrupt Decay into Jarsoul, which is nice. This hand we've got to take the Overlord, right? If we take Dollmaker or Sorin, they just play Overlord and get it straight back again. Interesting that they just run out the Dollmaker here. I guess it's because they've got a second one. But either way, we're going to Thoughtseize away the Sorin here, just so Elender isn't a good top deck for them. And then we can just, Jarsoul next turn. Presumably they do want to hold on to this second Dollmaker in case they draw Overlord. So using Jarsoul to get rid of that is going to be pretty nice. Especially if we see that their last card is a land. Interesting that they choose to run it out here. They can do the little trick here where they turn Dollmaker into a token, which can then blink the other Dollmaker. And then since they're both tokens, you can activate them to give the other one indestructible. And then you've got 2 uses of it as well. So they can protect their board from attacks quite well here. But either way, we go for Jarsoul here. It's a little bit annoying that we can't use this Thoughtseize, but I think we just snap it off so that we can recast a 2-mana card from the graveyard next turn. Because, there's very few cards in their deck that they're not going to be able to cast here. I guess Elender is the exception. They do top deck Juggernaut Peddler, which is a little bit annoying. But again, I think we should be good here, right? If they take Pillage the Bog, we can just double Abrupt Decay, which puts them on the back foot quite a lot. They do take the Pillage the Bog, which is, like I said, a little bit annoying, but... Okay, I was going to say, I couldn't tell. I was trying to figure out what the last land in their hand was. It looked kind of like a Concealed Courtyard, but now they can use the mana to protect the other Dollmakers. But, thankfully we draw Assemble the Team off the top, which means we can just double up on that if we wanted to. But having said that, I don't mind using double Abrupt Decay now we've found the Sorin, right? Just to keep them off the board, ensure that they can't race. Although having said that, this is pretty weak to discard spells, and getting Peddler off the board isn't actually that important. So thinking about it, I maybe should have gone for Assemble there, but I guess, if we use Assemble to try and get a backup for, one of our 2 combo pieces, like if we get a second Elender, presumably if they have a discard spell, they'll just get rid of the one of that we don't have a double of, right? If we get an Elender, they'll just take the Sorin. If we get a Sorin, they'll just take the Elender. But either way, we do have the Sorin into Elender here. And with Jarsoul having, or being on 3 intensity, I think I like going for Invoke the Divine here, because one downside of the little trick they've done with Dollmaker is it turns their creatures into artifacts. So we can use Invoke Divine to kill the first one, then recast it with Jarsoul, which not only kills the other Dollmaker, but it also means that we gain 8. So we immediately get an 8/8, which is huge. And then we can use the Abundant Harvest here to go for non-land and see what we hit. Okay, back up Sorin, that's pretty nice. And now we should be good. I don't think there's anything they can draw here that will get them back into it, really. We've already got Saint Elender down, we've got Jarsoul, we've got Juggernaut, even in case they do find an answer to our 8/8 or to Elender here. And yeah, opponent just scoops it up, so we got there, nice. Okay, so going into round 7 here, and we are 4-2. So again, every game is a must-win from here on out. Or sorry, every match is. Unfortunately, we're on the draw here, which is a little bit annoying. And we're up against a Lurrus deck. And this hand looks good to me, though. We don't have any red lands, which is a little bit annoying. But we've got Discard Spell on 1. We've got Abundant Harvest and Pillage. Hopefully Pillage could find us Saint Elender. And then hopefully we won't need Abundant Harvest to find an extra land. But... okay, so it looks like the opponent's on 4-color Samwise from what we've seen so far, right? The Stomping Ground and the hand. I think, even though Amped Raptor is a really powerful card in this deck and can often, cascade into the card you just took with the discard spell, Goblin Bombardment specifically is really good against our deck because it's good against Sorin into Saint Elender. They can ping down the Sorin before we get to untap with it, and they can also chump block the Saint Elender itself before we get the lifelink to deny us the token as well. So I think we always have to take the bombardment there. And then opponent takes the treasure chest off there, which, is really, really slow. So we're not too worried about that. So they could either go for Amped Raptor or Ajani here. I'm definitely more scared of the Amped Raptor because that can find, an Ajani potentially, and then they have 3 bodies in play, or could find them another bombardment potentially as well. So... But yeah, I think my plan here is probably... Well, I guess we'll see what they play first. We might want to Abrupt Decay instead of Pillage here. And then next turn we can hopefully go Abundant Harvest into Pillage. And we look a bit further into the deck as well. But we do find the land here. So because we have the third land, I think I'm just going to go for Pillage. Just to try... Because if we find a Saint Elender, it's really solid there. With 2 Sorins, I don't think we need another one. So I'm just going to take an extra land here. And then that means that we can... very safely use this Abundant Harvest to name non-land, which then gives us kind of another look at Saint Elender here. So opponent decides to run out of Ajani here, which is kind of scary. Oh wow, I guess it's scary if they have a bombardment or they find one off Amped Raptor. So they get in for 2. And they do have another bombardment, which is really rough. So opponents had a very good start here. So thankfully we do have Abrupt Decay to take out the Ajani Planeswalker here, which is the most pressing issue. I mean, bombardment is a problem, like I said, but I think Ajani is more of an issue. So I'm going to lead on the Harvest, though, just to see what we hit, because we're playing both of these cards here regardless, so I think just getting a bit more information is more useful. Find another discard spell, and then I think we just have to just kill the Ajani here. Again, bombardment is an issue, but... I think we're just dying to the Ajani a lot quicker. If they didn't have another red permanent, if they didn't have Raptor and they didn't, if we didn't know they had another Raptor in hand, then you could maybe go after the bombardment and just hope they don't have another red permanent, so that they're, just putting tokens in play rather than doming you for 5 every time. So opponent goes Amped Raptor, and then we see the Samwise. So now we 100% know what we're up against. And then they also have the Cauldron Familiar. So I don't think there's really much we could have done this game. I think the opponent just had a really nice start there. So this matchup, we definitely want the Stone of Erex. We definitely want the Pithing Needles and the Abrupt Decays. Discard spells are still pretty good in this matchup, but I don't think we need to overload on them really, just because Stone of Erek and Pithing Needle are really good against what they're trying to do. Just shutting off the bombardment, shutting off their death triggers, shutting them off the combo is a really big deal. Plus, a lot, because they're running Ajani, Amped Raptor, Bombardment, Birthing Ritual, they have a lot of very high impact cards. So, just using a Thoughtseize to get rid of a bombardment, but letting them getting Birthing Ritual off, it's not ideal. I think it makes more sense to have stuff like Abrupt Decay to be able to answer those cards once they're put into play. That can also, help you stabilize if you start falling behind on board as well. Okay, so going into game 2 here, and I do feel a lot more confident post-sideboard. Like I said, Stone of Erek, Pithing Needle, Abrupt Decay, all really good cards against what they're trying to do, and Saint Elender is really strong against them as well. So this hand is interesting, but I feel like it's just too slow. We don't have any proactive game plan here, really. We've just got a lot of cards that, dig for other cards, so quite a slow hand. This I'm happy to keep. We don't have any interaction yet, but we do have both Jarsel and Sorin. Obviously, we're going to have to use these harvests to name land. Well, the first one at least anyway. And then we can potentially use Pillage the Bog to try and find a Stone of Erek. We've obviously got Jarsel here as well. So, keeping one landers is always a bit risky. But on the play, against a deck that's very unlikely to have discard effects with double harvest here, I feel pretty confident keeping this one. And, absolute worst case scenario, even if we don't find early interaction, we can just go, harvest into Jarsel, and then, we'll have a lot of looks at Elender. Very glad we had the harvest there, because the next land was 4 cards down. That would have been a nightmare. Huh. Okay, I forgot they had Thoughtseize. Kind of surprised about that. But having said that, our hand is still relatively Thoughtseize proof, right? We have Sorin and Jarsel are both really threatening cards. And regardless of what they take, we can use Harvest and Pillage to try and find, and maybe another Jarsel or a Saint Elender. So after thinking for a while, the opponent ends up going for the Sorin, which makes sense, but, I'm still pretty happy about that. We've got Jarsel to go for next turn, and I'm kind of surprised they're running Thoughtseize in a Birthing Ritual deck, assuming they're on Birthing Ritual. I personally would prefer to run Juggernaut Peddler, but either way, I don't think it's very likely that they'll have another Thoughtseize, so we should be pretty safe to just, jam the Jarsel here, which is nice. And we do now have Abrupt Decay for interaction as well. Unfortunately, we don't have a Thoughtseize here. And I end up going for non-land here, which I think I like, right? You know, having the 4th land when you have cards like Pillage the Bog is pretty nice, but, you know, we have this other Abundant Harvest in hand if we do miss a land drop, and, you know, going non-land and then drawing a land off the top is so much better, right? We now have an Elender, so all we need to find is Sorin to be able to, you know, start applying pressure. An opponent just puts Lotus into hand, so that signals to me they must have a pretty slow hand. So we just draw Sorin off the top, which is obviously sick. And the awkward thing here, this is one of the awkward things about running fast lands in this deck, is this is a spot, if you weren't running any fast lands, where you could fairly safely go Abundant Harvest, name land, and then play Sorin. But because we're playing fast lands in this deck, that's not a safe line, or not a guaranteed line to be able to do anyway. So I think I end up going for Faith's Fetters here because we don't want them to just recast the Haywire Might with Lurrus, right? If we go for Invoke the Divine, they just have something free to cast with Lurrus. Because I was kind of surprised they put Lurrus into hand just because they have nothing to cast it with. Nothing in their graveyard to recast with Lurrus right now. But either way, I feel pretty confident here, right? We didn't get to use Jasta last turn, but we've got double Abrupt Decay available here, which is pretty nice. And then we still have cards like Stone of Erech or Pithing Needle that we could find, and their Haywire Might is locked down right now. So, yeah, feeling pretty good here. Okay, although they did have the second Haywire Might, so now, well, I guess it doesn't really matter because we can just Abrupt Decay one of them, right? We can go Abrupt Decay the Haywire Might, and then use Jarstal to cast it again, take out the Samwise, and then we could potentially try and use Pillage the Bog to find a Stone of Erech. So we plus on the 4/4 here just to get a bigger token, get more life, and then I think I like leading on Abundant Harvest, naming non-land, just in case we draw Thoughtseize, or break expectations, and we do draw Thoughtseize, which is really nice. So now we can get rid of the Lurrus or something else in their hand if they've got anything. So yeah, opponent had a really slow start here, and now we still have enough mana to go Abrupt Decay, take out the Samwise and the Haywire Might, and then hopefully we can use this Pillage the Bog to find either a Stone of Erech or a Pithing Needle, and then the game's just pretty much locked up at that point, right? They're not going to be able to beat us on board fairly, and then that will shut off the combo side as well. And we get an 8/8. I mean, even without Stone of Erech, I don't think there's anything they can draw here to get them back into it. So yeah, end up taking game 2. And then I'm fairly confident going into game 3, because like I said, with these Stone of Erechs, with the Pithing Needles, with the Abrupt Decays, we definitely have a big advantage against them post-sideboard. Okay, so going into game 3 here, obviously we're on the draw, but again, you know, I feel pretty confident in this matchup. And this hand is kind of slow, but, you know, having double Fatal Push will also slow the opponent down quite a lot. If we happen to draw either of our combo pieces in the first couple turns, then, you know, we have a really good chance of finding the other one with Assemble. So just going to lead on an untapped Overgrown Tomb so we can Fatal Push a 2-drop. You know, if they play something like a Samwise or an Ajani, we'd be really interested in taking that out. And they do have Birthing Rituals, so we definitely want to deny them the first trigger. So never great to have to Fatal Push a Cauldron Familiar, but it is what it is. So here I actually think I like going for Thoughtseize, even though it's kind of mana inefficient here, just because if they have a creature, we can get rid of it. And yeah, it ends up paying off here, I guess, because, you know, we've got rid of the second Birthing Ritual. Any creature off the top would then really snowball the game. So getting rid of the second one's pretty nice. And then we draw a Saint Elender off the top, which is huge. So now all we need to do is try and find a Sorin here. And unfortunately we don't. And we also don't have an untapped black source for Thoughtseize to take out Lurrus. But we do draw Stone of Erech, which is huge. And, you know, we've still got Assemble the Team here as well. So, and also, I was going to say the opponent can't cast Lurrus right now, but we know they've got a Sacred Foundry in hand. But if they do cast the Lurrus, they're not able to recast Cauldron Familiar from the graveyard. So if they do shock in the Sacred Foundry here, they'll only have a single red or green mana available left. And if they haven't drawn one of their 1-drops, then they just got to run the Lurrus out. And then we could potentially think about maybe going crack Stone of Erech, Fatal Push the Lurrus maybe. Obviously, throwing away Stone of Erech isn't great, but letting them have Lurrus when they can keep recasting Cauldron Familiar from the graveyard and, you know, podding it into something else off the Birthing Ritual seems worse to me. So now, one thing to note as well is they do have access to Boseiju here because they've got a legendary creature in play. And again, I was thinking at the time, it's very unlikely here that they sacrifice the Lurrus to get anything, really. Because they need the Lurrus for the Boseiju, and they also want it to recast creatures from the graveyard. So we do draw another land off the top, and I do think I like the line I was talking about before, because you also get rid of the graveyard for Lurrus, you get rid of the graveyard for Cauldron Familiar, so if they do have Samwise and a sack outlet, they don't just have the Cauldron Familiar available there, and we know from how they played last turn that they don't have any creatures in hand currently. And we draw Sorin off the top, which is huge. I mean, either way, even if we drawn a land off the top, we could have then gone Assemble into Sorin, but I feel pretty confident about this spot, right? Obviously, the opponent's draw was pretty bad this game. Do feel for them a little bit, but now we can go Sorin into Elenda, take out the Birthing Ritual, and then they've basically just got nothing left at all. So we go Saint Elenda, get Invoke the Divine, take out the Birthing Ritual, and then we can just try and assemble the team for a Stone of Erect just to shut off the combo in case they are, like, you know, slow rolling it with 2 of the combo pieces in hand, waiting to do it all in one turn, maybe. Oh, does it look like the opponent might have something here? I can't remember if they have a Fragment Reality, maybe. Well, they definitely have priority for something. Although I guess we know they have Boseiju in hand, so it could just be that. But yeah, if they do have Fragment Reality, I think they've seen Jarstal this game, so they should wait until after the main phase. But yeah, it doesn't look like they have it. Ships it back. So yeah, unless the opponent had 2 of the combo pieces and has just drawn the 3rd, we should just be good here, I think. So yeah, opponent just ships it back. So I think we want to just try and find Stone of Erect off Assemble the Team here, right? If we can go Stone of Erect... Assemble the Team, Stone of Erect, we can then Fatal Push the Trap Finder, which then cuts them off a Birthing Ritual target in case they draw that off the top. Wow, I didn't even scroll. What was I thinking there? Yeah, we could have potentially had Stone of Erect further in there, but maybe in the moment I was just thinking Jarstal should get the job done here. I guess since we have Fatal Push and Abrupt Decay up, I'm not too worried about it, but I feel like I should have at least looked to see if Stone of Erect was available. I guess the other thing is they also have the Boseiju. So that's probably why, thinking about it. Right, if we do go Stone of Erect, they probably just Boseiju at end of turn, so... Boseiju isn't really going to be doing much else outside of that. So maybe that was a better line. Right, we still have removal up this turn, so I'm not too worried about the combo. And yeah, opponent just scoops up, so we got there. Nice. Okay, so going into round 8 here, and we're still 5-2, so we still need to win everything from here on out. And we're on the draw, which is a little bit annoying, but this hand looks pretty good, right? We've got early interaction, we got Harvest that can hopefully find something else, and Jarstal on turn 3, which is huge. And then Assemble the Team is excellent off the top, so we're going to lead on the discard spell for sure. Take the Ajani, obviously that doesn't mean it's the only non-land in the hand. Presumably they just have a bunch of other 1-drops alongside this, so we don't get that much information, but getting to snipe an Ajani here is huge, because, the 1-drops in Mardu, which is I assume what they're on, again, not 100% sure, could be on 4-color as well, but typically the 1-drops are the least impactful cards, right? They're typically unless they're main decking discard spells, but they're typically kind of like the setup cards, like your Unlucky Witness, your Trap Finders and stuff like that. So opponent's obviously in the tank here about which spellbook card to take, but we should be pretty set on just going for Assemble the Team into Jarstal here, I think. Hopefully set up for the combo on turn 4. So they do have the leather armor, which does help protect one of their creatures, but it just gets ward 1, which isn't really too much of a big deal. And then we draw Thoughtseize off the top, which is huge. So I definitely think it's worth just going for the Thoughtseize here. First of all, just to potentially clear a piece of interaction out of the way, right? It's Claim the Firstborn is really good if they use it to get rid of Jarsel, or to take control of Jarsel, because they can potentially, cast one of their own cards from the graveyard. Now, I'm not sure they have a 2-drop in the yard yet. I can't quite remember to be able to recast, but the reason that turn why I wanted to go for the Thoughtseize is because we get to use it here to get rid of one of their cards, and now we can also recast it off the Jarsel going into turn 3, which is pretty huge. Now, having said that, we did already have Break Expectations in the yard, so there's maybe an argument for going for Assemble on turn 2 to try and set up for the combo earlier, and then using Break Expectations to get rid of Lurrus, but they would have still had the Claim the Firstborn, so they could have claimed the Jarsel, sacked it to the Phyrexian Tower. So I think it ended up working out, and I think it's a pretty minor thing anyway, right? Because this turn we can still go, Assemble into Jarsel. Obviously, now they have the Phyrexian Tower, they have a way to trigger Revolt for Fatal Push, but we can just run out Jarsel again. If we don't think they've got anything in hand, we don't have to, we can use Jarsel to recast an Abundant Harvest instead of a discard spell, which I think from how they've played is pretty safe to assume if they had something else, they probably would have cast it last turn. I don't think there's anything else they could really have other than maybe a piece of creature removal that they wouldn't have played here already. So we can use the Abundant Harvest, naming non-land, which I still think I like because, if we'd hit Saint Nalenda, for example, that would have been huge. So opponent has Marionette Apprentice here, which is a good top deck because it means if they draw another creature like an Ajani or a Marionette Apprentice, for example, they then are able to use the Guide of Souls trigger to start attacking us in the air, and we are at 7, which is a concern right now. So here I think we go for Assemble the Team, and we want to go for a Lender and a land this turn if we can. So we find an Lender, now we get to recast the Assemble the Team, and we're odds on of us finding an untapped land are pretty high here, so I'm fairly confident, and we find a land, but unfortunately, we have to take a little bit of damage off this land, but it is what it is. We're going to be gaining 4 back off the Elenda anyway. So we cast the Sorin here, and then in this spot, I think it makes the most sense to go for Inspiring Cleric, because if they don't trigger the Guide of Souls immediately, we can... Actually, I do end up going for the Inspiring Cleric, which does enable us to potentially use the Helix ability of Sorin next turn, but I could also potentially see an argument, looking back on it now, of using Faith's Fetters on Phyrexian Tower, because one way that they can potentially stop us snowballing the game here is using Phyrexian Tower in combat to prevent us gaining life from lifelink, if that makes sense. And also, as you can see here, it enables them to trigger Unlucky Witness and Trap Finders that they find off the top. So, and now they have enough energy to get a Guide of Souls trigger. So, interesting. Looking back on it, I think it probably would have been slightly better to use Faith's Fetters on Phyrexian Tower. Now, I don't think the opponent can afford to attack with the Trap Finder here because our life total is vital in this matchup, right? They basically rely on chip damage in order to kill us, so letting us gain 4 back off Elenda here seems really bad. They do choose to attack with the token, though. Obviously, they're going to attack with something and give it flying here. Interesting they chose to go with the token. I guess they don't want Guide of Souls or Apprentice to be just a natural target for Fatal Push if we have it. So I end up sacrificing the Inspiring Cleric here whilst the opponent doesn't have access to Phyrexian Tower to deny us the life gain here. And we're going to be taking out the Marionette Apprentice just to shut off Goblin Bombardment as a really good top deck here. And then we'll go for Pillage the Bog to see what we hit. And I think I like just going for Fatal Push here, right? It gives us a good way to answer the Guide of Souls, which is probably the biggest issue. And then sacrificing the Inspiring Cleric also enables us to replay it here, which is absolutely huge, right? Now we have another target for the Helix ability. We gain an extra 3 life, which makes the token bigger that we get off the Elenda. And now we're at 15. We can fairly freely just cast these Harvests, see what we hit. So ship it back. I think we're basically guaranteed to win here. This is the big thing of Mardu versus 4-color. 4-color, you always run the risk of them assembling the combo, whereas at this point, I think it's basically impossible for us to lose here, right? We're way ahead on board. We have a ton of life gain, so it's unlikely they'll be able to deal chip damage, or at least enough chip damage to win the game. Now, they can attack down the Sorin here, but, they're sacrificing the Amped Raptor, so I just think they're dead on board regardless of what they do here. So, end up taking down game 1. Post-sideboard, I think we're just going to sideboard the same as we did last time, I'd imagine. All the Stone of Erex, Abrupt Decay, Pithing Needle, cut the Break Expectations, and cut the Crocs. So maybe... Well, actually, I think cutting Pillage the Bog is probably better because I have seen some Mardu lists running Fragment Reality. So, yeah, instead, just to make room, I'm going to be trimming the Pillage the Bog and the Abundant Harvest instead. And, yeah, I think I'm happy to ship it back. And then the really nice thing about getting game 1 here is I do feel like this matchup gets a lot better post-sideboard, so I think we should be good. And, yeah, interesting that I choose to cut the Croxa here. I think I'm maybe just hoping that they don't run Fragment Reality, because typically, from what I've seen, if Fragment is run, it's usually only as a 1 or 2 of, so Croxa isn't as essential here, and I don't think it's particularly good against them if we ever draw it naturally either. So if we do see Fragment Reality in game 2, I'll probably bring it back in for game 3, because, you know, obviously some lists could be running it in high numbers. You know, it is a perfectly reasonable card, so... By the way, going into game 2, even on the draw, like I said, with the Stone of Erex, with the Pithing Needles, with the Abrupt Decays, I definitely feel like this is a favourable matchup for us. So this hand looks pretty good to me, right? We've got a good curve out here. Thoughtseize into Assemble, potentially into a Sorin on turn 3 if we can find it off the Assemble here. And the opponent has nothing on turn 1, which is great to see. So we lead on the Thoughtseize here. And I think we just have to take the Amp Trap. So obviously, Ajani into Ajani is a powerful line. You know, does get them the flip, but doesn't look like they have a white land here, which is absolutely huge for us. So now we can go Assemble. We do find the Sorin. You know, again, statistically, we're likely to, because we look so many cards deep when you cast it on turn 2. And then they miss their 3rd land drop, and they don't have white mana here. So this is absolutely enormous for us. We can get the Saint Elender down. Unless they have like a Heartless Act or something, they're not going to be able to deny us the token here. So now we can run out Inspiring Cleric, just apply maximum pressure, try and close the game out quickly. They do have Molten Collapse, but I think that's a Phyrexian Tower, right? So they can't even cast it with the mana they have available right now. So obviously very rough luck for the opponent, but you know, it was a risky keep from their part, so they ended up getting punished for it, I guess. But yeah, now we're on to the winning in, which is huge. Okay, so here we go, round 9. This is the big one. If we win this, we're into day 2. If we don't, we ended up coming close again. And I'm nervous going into this one because the last 2 times that I've been in this position, I've ended up being in a position where I should be winning and punting it. So I'm really, really hoping I don't do that again here. So this is a good hand. Obviously, being on the draw is annoying. And we're up against either Mardu Sacrifice again or 4-color Samwise. And we see straight away we're basically guaranteed to be against Mardu here. And I think taking Amp Trap to makes the most sense here, right? They've got doubles of Marionette Apprentice. We're not bothered at all about Fatal Push right now. And so this hand should be pretty good, assuming we hit the 3rd land on curve, right? Hopefully we can go Assemble to find the Saint Elender into Sorin here. And I still think it's best to just go for that regardless, even though we miss a land drop, because if we do draw the 3rd land naturally, we can just jam Sorin on turn 3, which is huge. If not, we can go Abundant Harvest to guarantee for the following turn, but the opponent is going to start getting in for damage here. With double Marionette Apprentice, Goblin Trap Finders... not Goblin Trap Finder, Goblin Bombardment is going to be a devastating top deck if they find that. So, really hoping that we find the 3rd land off the top here. And we do, thankfully, which is huge. We don't have to worry about Fatal Push doing anything on this board, really. I guess it does take out the 4/4 Avatar token, but we should still gain 4 life and get the Inspiring Cleric in play, which is, I believe, what I should go for here. Gets another blocker down, allows us to use the Lightning Helix ability on the Cleric. And you can also, you know, the nice thing about Cleric being a vampire is that if we use the other ability to give it Lifelink and Death Touch, it also gets +1/+1 counters every single turn, which is really nice against Mardu, where life gain is huge. Very interesting, the opponent didn't end step the Fatal Push on the 4/4. Presumably they're going to be using that against it anyway, unless maybe they have a Sacrifice outlet and they want to use the Fatal Push to kill the Inspiring Cleric to cut us off the Lightning Helix ability on Sorin next turn, maybe. But I was a little surprised about that. I assumed they would probably just end step the Fatal Push to just ensure that they have 3 mana available this turn, right? Because if they miss a land drop, they could have put Lurrus into hand here if they'd used their mana to kill the 4/4 at the end of last turn. So opponent in the tank here. And after thinking for a while, they end up just casting the Ajani here, which is an issue. Now it makes sense why they kept the Fatal Push, because they can now Fatal Push their own token. They can flip the Ajani and then deal, what would that be, 6 damage anywhere. I mean, thankfully the Elender would survive here if they did that, which is huge. So they do Fatal Push their own cat token, which makes sense. We also take 2 off the Marionette Apprentice triggers. And thankfully this is 6 and not 7. We get to keep the Saint Elender around, which is huge here. And they do go face, which makes sense. Kind of to be expected. But if they don't kill the Inspiring Cleric here, we can still... Or if they don't attack down the Sorin, rather, we can still use the Sorin to kill the Ajani here. Right, we can Helix. I think it... I was going to lead on Break Expectations, but I think it makes sense to hold on to that until they put Lotus into hand here. Wow, okay, actually that makes sense as well. I end up going after the Marionette Apprentice because we can use the Abrupt Decay to kill the Ajani, and this just limits the amount of damage that we're taking, especially, you know, if they happen to top deck a Goblin Bombardment, for example. So now I think it makes sense to Abrupt Decay the Ajani and probably use Abundant Harvest, naming non-land here, and then if they do have not much going on, we can use Break Expectations to hit the Lotus. A little bit awkward we hit another one though, because now the opponent knows we have it, so they might potentially, wait on Lotus until they have more mana available. So they end up casting an Unlucky Witness here. And then they do put Lotus into hand, which I'm a little bit surprised about. Maybe they think that, with 4 lands, the only way they can really avoid Break Expectations is waiting until they have 6 mana. And even then, they wouldn't get to activate at the same turn. So I like going for Fatal Push on the Apprentice here. Just, shuts off any of the chip damage that they would be dealing. Get in for everything. We're going to be gaining 11 back here, which is huge. And then we can Break Expectations the Lotus. And then, they will get an Unlucky Witness trigger here, but I think it's very unlikely the opponent wins here. I mean, they do find an Ajani, which is, one of the lines I can see where they could potentially get themselves out of it. But now we can Break Expectations away the Lurus. And unless they happen to find Bombardment off the top, even if they do find Bombardment off the top, I don't think it would be enough. But, that would be the only thing that really gives them a chance here, I think. I guess they do get a card off the spellbook as well, but, like I've said a few times, that very, very rarely actually makes a difference on the game. It will occasionally, but for the most part, it doesn't really. And then I think, again, with this hand, we can afford to name non-land again here. 4th land would be useful, but we're not really planning on casting this second Sorin, and we've only got 1 mana card outside of that, so I think it makes the most sense here to just go for Assemble. And then the opponent needs to kill the Sorin here, right? Because otherwise we can just Helix without even needing to attack. So they give Gingerbrute essentially unblockable, and then I think it makes the most sense for them to attack with the cat token as well, because since they have a Trap Finder here, we can't actually afford to block the cat token, because they'll just flip the Ajani, activate it, and then use the ability on the Ajani to kill the Sorin anyway. Whereas at least this way, we don't have to worry about the Ajani. I mean, regardless, we have a second Sorin, so we're guaranteed lethal hit anyway, but we'll just attack them with everything, force them to just block. Okay, yeah, opponent just takes the damage. So going into game 2 here again, very, very big to get game 1 against Mardu Sacrifice, because I do think it improves quite a lot post-sideboard. So again, same as before, Pithing Needle, Stone of Erect, Abrupt Decay, take out the Break Expectations, trim Pillage, trim Croxer unless we see Fragment, and just ship it back. Okay, so going into game 2 here, obviously we're on the draw. And this hand, I think we can afford to keep it right. We've got Needle for Bombardment, and we've got ways to dig towards our combo pieces. Obviously, we're missing that powerful turn 3 play, but We're also fairly Thoughtseize resistant here, right? They can take the Needle, but we've still got Abrupt Decay for the Bombardment if they do have it. They can take the Assemble the Team, but we've still got Pillage the Bog, which can potentially find a Jarsel or something like that. So do end up taking the Assemble the Team, which makes sense. And then importantly, I think... I can't remember at the time, but if the opponent is getting priority when they're tapped out this early in the game, they probably have a Surgical Extraction, which is very useful to know. Right, it is kind of annoying when you're the one playing Surgical when Arena's just giving away that you have it, but always pay attention to the opponent, right? If you're playing a graveyard deck, it's fairly easy to tell if they have it, right? If they're tapped out and they're still getting priority, then they basically guarantee to have a Surgical, especially during your turn, because there's very few instants that can do that. So very good start from the opponent. Amp Raptor into Ajani is tough. We do draw a Fatal Push, though, which is pretty nice here, because I would quite like to go Abundant Harvest into Fatal Push here and save the Pillage the Bog until we have an extra land in play. Here, I think we should just go for non-land. I don't know why we're even considering land there. And Jarsel is an excellent pickup here. I'm just going to snap off the Fatal Push here just to avoid them using... an instant speed sacrifice outlet like Deadly Dispute, Phyrexian Tower, or, Village Rites, whatever. Because if we wait until their turn, they can potentially, they'll attack, then we'll probably want to Fatal Push to just save us the damage that we would take from the Ajani attacking, and then they could sacrifice the cat token in response. So do it main phase to avoid that, basically. And then they also have Marionette Apprentice, so... They are starting to go wide, which is a little bit of a concern, but we should be able to go Jarsel, push the Apprentice, and then hopefully hold the board down for a little bit at least. If it survives till next turn, then we're really good, because even if we are behind on board, we can double Abrupt Decay. And the main card that we're worried about on board states like this is Goblin Bombardment, which we've already got unlocked with the Pithing Needle. Now, unfortunately, the opponent can Fatal Push here, if they have one, because they can sacrifice presumably the Servo token to Phyrexian Tower to trigger Revolt, and then use the black mana to kill Jarsel before we get the trigger, which would suck. Because then we're left with a very slow hand, right? We can decay away the Apprentice, but we're still taking 5 damage well, I guess it would be 4 damage if they sacrifice the Servo, but, with a hand of Pillage, Assemble, Abrupt Decay, we don't really have a powerful proactive game plan, really. But thankfully they don't have the Fatal Push, which is huge. So now we can push the Apprentice. So they sacrifice the Servo. Presumably this is Deadly Dispute or something like that. Or Corrupted Conviction. Yeah, Deadly Dispute. And then we just ship it back. And this is pretty nice because we should just be good to stop them attacking here unless they have a Fatal Push. And if they drew one... I guess if they drew one, it does kind of make sense to wait until main phase to go for it. The fact the opponent's cracking their only red and white land here is a very good sign. I mean, I guess it could be another way for them to trigger Fatal Push, but they do have Amped Raptor, which is kind of scary, but thankfully they don't hit anything too high impact, right? They get a Trap Finder there. And they don't attack, which is huge for us. And here I choose to lead on Abrupt Decay, which I think is a mistake. I think I should lead on Assemble the Team here because we know they have Surgical Extraction from Arena giving away priority here, right? And I think my thought process was if they Surgical the Abrupt Decay, I can still Assemble the Team main phase 2. But the issue here is if they choose to Surgical the Assemble the Team, we just lose the best card in our hand here. And unlike a lot of other extraction effects, we don't even get to draw a card if we lose a card from our hand to Surgical. So because we kind of knew about Surgical because Arena giving away priority, we absolutely should have led on Assemble the Team here. This was a huge mistake because now the opponent does go for the better line. They Surgical the Assemble the Team. We lose the best card from our hand, which sucks. And then we can Abrupt Decay the Amped Raptor, but, we could have got, a look at the best cards in our deck if we'd cast the Assemble the Team first. So that was definitely a big misplay on my part. But we still get to recast the Abrupt Decay, and we still have a Pillage the Bog in hand. So it's not the end of the world, but you know, losing a card unnecessarily is, especially in kind of grindy matchups like this, makes a huge difference. So here, I mean, again, you know, if we'd found Sorin off, if we'd found a lender off that first assemble the team and we just found Sorin off Pillage the Bog, we would probably be good to win next turn. So not casting assemble the team there was a huge mistake on my part for sure. So it looks like opponent's thinking of sacking the Trap Finder here, which they do. And then they find an Amped Raptor off the Trap Finder, which is probably best possible for them. Thankfully, they don't hit like an Ajani here, but, you know, still quite a good line from the opponent. And then they choose to put Lewis into hand. Definitely going to block here because they don't really have any sources of chip. You know, obviously, their only source of chip damage here is Bombardment, which we already have on lock with Pithing Needle. So here we've got Stone of Erech, and I choose to just go for the Sorin here, which I'm not sure I love, to be honest. Because I think it's better to have Stone of Erech up here, right? So I attack with both just to gain some life back, but yeah, I think I should have held Stone of Erech open. I'm actually quite happy with that trade because, you know, we deny them the trigger, we get them off the board. Unfortunately, the opponent now can cast Lewis into, you know, Ajani, into Amped Raptor. So looking back on it now, I think I made another mistake here where the life gain from Sorin isn't really that important. We could have just attacked with Jarsel here, and then when they cast Lewis, we just activate Stone of Erech. Now here we want to stone first just in case we find a Saint Elender. I think that's the only real way we get out of this. And unfortunately we find another land, which sucks. So again, this is a situation where if we'd cast that assemble, I think there's a very, very good chance that we already have a Saint Elender in play here. So definitely cost us here. I think, you know, combination of being a bit nervous because it's the winning in, and I've historically punted a lot of these, and also, you know, playing 9 rounds in a row and trying to focus each game, you do kind of lose focus a little bit. So, but I think it's really important to always watch games back like this, just to acknowledge the misplays and try not to make them in future. So now the opponent can attack down the Sorin, so Elender isn't even a good top deck anymore. So, yeah, things starting to unravel here. But like I said, you know, had I gone for Assemble the Team, I think there is a pretty good chance that we have the combo, or at least have something else, right? If we'd found another Jarsel, for example, that would have made a huge difference on this board state. If we had held open Stone of Erech, they wouldn't have had the Ajani here. They would have just had a Lurus. So, yeah, multiple missteps. And then we just draw a Thoughtseize off the top. So, ends up going to game 3. And definitely some big misplays this game, which is annoying for sure. But again, going into game 3, we're on the play, and we should still have an advantage. We've got the Stone of Erex, we've got the Pithing Needles, we've got the Abrupt Decays, so... Okay, so going into game 3 here, we're on the play, and this hand looks great, right? We've got Fatal Push on 1, Assemble to try and find the Lender on 2, into Sorin on 3, so very happy to keep this one for sure. So obviously lead on the Blooming Marsh, we want to have Fatal Push available here in case they play like a Guide of Souls, for example, which they do, so really good efficient use of our mana here, get them off the board, then we can tap out for Assemble, hopefully find a Saint Elender here, which we do, which is absolutely huge. So now we've got the combo on turn 3 on the play. So I'm really excited about this spot. Obviously, discard spells could be rough here, right? If they Thoughtseize or Juggernaut Peddler away the Sorin. But, you know, we've still got 2 Pillage the Bogs, which gives us a good amount of looks to find another one. And thankfully for us, they just have the Ajani here, which is huge. So now we can just jam the Sorin here. And I think in this instance, we want to go for Inspiring Cleric, right? Gives us the option to Helix away the Ajani if they don't have a way to flip it here. And just helps us apply pressure, put the opponent on the back foot, force some chump blocks, get us back up to 20. So yeah, I feel pretty good about this spot. Now, without being too spoilery, this is going to be the key turn in this game coming up here. Or these 2 turns here will decide it. So opponent has Goblin Bombardment here, and this is a really interesting board position because the opponent, if I play optimally, they should take out the Sorin here, because if we use the Sorin ability to Lightning Helix, sacrifice the Inspiring Cleric, targeting the Ajani, they're in trouble, because their 2 options here are sacrifice the cat token in response, flip the Ajani into a Planeswalker, we just attack it down with both of our creatures, so even if they have a Fatal Push or, Fragment Reality, whatever, we still get to kill the Ajani here, right? If they choose to sacrifice the Ajani instead, then that's dealt with straight away. So the opponent should use the bombardment here if I play optimally, but I think the opponent recognizes that the only way they're going to win this game is by allowing me to make a mistake, which I do. I absolutely butcher this turn. So first of all, I'm concerned that this Sorin isn't going to survive here, that they're going to be able to kill it straight away. So I end up just plussing mindlessly on the Inspiring Cleric without even really thinking about it. I also probably should have led on Pillage the Bog first, maybe just to see what we hit, because if the opponent does instant speed kill the Sorin in response to Pillage, then we should still be good to win here. I end up picking the Abrupt Decay to take out the bombardment, but this is a nightmare because the opponent can still flip Ajani here and have it survive till the next turn, which is the one thing that we wanted to avoid here. Me using the Sorin to put a counter on the Cleric is an enormous punt here, right? We have to attack to apply pressure to get the 8/8, but they can obviously just block with the 2/1 and then flip it. Again, I still think we're in a winning position here, even with that really big misplay. But if I use the Sorin to sacrifice the Inspiring Cleric, targeting the Ajani, even if we don't find Abrupt Decay for Goblin Bombardment, we should be good. I mean, they did have the Fragment Reality for the Saint Elenda here, but if, like I said, we go for that line where we use the Sorin, sacrifice the Cleric to target the Ajani, and they sacrifice the other cat in response to flip it, we can still attack Ajani with both of our 4 power creatures, and even if the opponent has Fragment Reality for Elenda, we still take it out here. And now the opponent has a sick turn where they get 4 creatures in play, and they can activate the Ajani to deal 5 to something. So we've basically gone from being so far ahead to actually being behind in the course of a single turn. Now again, the opponent having Fragment Reality does make a huge difference here. I think if we have a Lender on this board instead of Jarstall, that makes an enormous difference. But I think if we use the Sorin to target the Ajani, then there's probably no way we lose this game. I mean, again, then replacing a Lender with Jarstall is rough, but we still have ways out of this situation, though, right? If we can Abrupt Decay the Ajani, for example, that's huge. We do find Stone of Urek, which isn't bad here, but Ajani is definitely the big issue, right? We really, really need to find an answer to this Ajani if possible. So we don't find the Abrupt Decay, unfortunately. I think looking at what we've got here, Stone of Urek is probably the best pick, because we can go Stone, Fatal Push, recast Fatal Push, deny them death triggers here. And we can also obviously gain life off the Avatar token as well. So we Fatal Push. I think it probably makes the most sense to take out the Marionette Apprentice, because that does represent a lot of damage. You know, if they do find an answer to the Stone of Urek, for example. And then I'm going to attack Ajani with both. So if they double block, we can try and blow them out with Fatal Push. And then next turn, we can pillage and get another look for Abrupt Decay. You know, presumably Jarstall won't survive the turn here, I'd imagine. So they do double block here, which enables us to Fatal Push the Raptor, get another creature off the board. And even though we did make the misplay, I still feel like this turn we are ahead, right? Obviously, if they find a creature, they can use the Ajani to take out the Jarstall here, which is kind of rough, which they do. But we can still, if we pillage for Abrupt Decay and take out the Ajani, obviously they have Lurrus still, but, we're not in a bad spot. And we still have the Ajani here. Oh, sorry, we still have the Sorin here. Which is, only one loyalty away from being able to put a lender into play. So we pillage here, again, just looking for Abrupt Decay. And we don't find it again, which sucks. We don't even find the Saint Lender here. So this is a really rough position. I think if we find Abrupt Decay this turn, then we're in a pretty decent spot, right? We can take out the Ajani. Obviously, the opponent could recast it off Lotus if they have an untapped land here, but it at least buys us time. And with Stone of Irek in play, they're not going to be able to reflip it. So not finding another Abrupt Decay here was pretty brutal. But again, I'm in this position because I've made misplays, right? So I can't complain too much. So this spot is really tough. I think if they'd attack with both creatures, we just push the other one that didn't attack, and then we can attack down the Ajani here, which would also be a huge line. But opponent has played very well this game. I've got to give big props to them because, like I said, that turn with Ajani plus Bombardment, if they play optimally, they probably lose. But what they did there is they basically put me in a position where, they let me make the mistake and I walked straight into it. So big props to the opponent. And again, they've played very tightly here, not overcommitting with the attacks, which would leave them vulnerable to me taking out the Ajani, which is the key threat here. So I end up taking Jarsel here, which seems very greedy to me. I think we should just be taking Abrupt Decay here to take out either Ajani or Lurrus. Like, I can understand the logic. You can crack Stone of Irek to trigger Revolt, then use Jarsel to Fatal Push. I mean, opponent having Thoughtseize means that it probably doesn't really make too much of a difference here, but now we're falling really far behind, right? We're at the mercy at the top of our deck. They can go Lurrus into Guide of Souls. Oh, no, they can go Lurrus into Guide of Souls, activate Ajani, take out the 4/4, attack down the Sorin. So, yeah, this was a really rough game, but it was entirely of my own making. If I'd just gone back to that Sorin turn and we'd sacrificed the Inspiring Cleric, take out the Ajani, even though they did have a decent hand like we saw, I still think we're just, they don't have the flipped Ajani, and the flipped Ajani here has made all the difference in the world. Now they can attack down the Sorin so that we can't put a lender into play off the top deck, and we draw a land off the top, so yeah, this is, I guess actually we can crack the Stone of Irek here, but we're paying 2 mana to draw a card, and we do draw Abrupt Decay, which does give us an out to either Lurrus or Ajani, and I think we just want to take out the Lurrus here, right? We don't have Stone of Irek anymore, so if we do take out the Ajani, they can just recast it and potentially reflip it again. And then they draw Marionette Apprentice, which doesn't really give us much time. I mean, being at 30 life does give us a few top decks, but Ajani just snowballs the game so quickly. Had we drawn, I don't know, Abrupt Decay in to kill the Ajani into a Jarsel, there's maybe a chance that we can salvage something from this game here, but it all really, really came down to that that turn where I didn't sacrifice the Inspiring Cleric to take out the Ajani. That was just a huge, huge mistake on my part, but props to the opponent. So now Sorin goes down, and now we draw Pithing Needle, so we can obviously name the flip to Ajani. Want to make sure that we name the correct one, but without Culling Ritual in the deck, which it's I still don't think Culling Ritual is correct to play in the 75 right now. It's easy to look at a board state like this and think, if you were running it, you would have an outs here, but it's awkward to run alongside Stone of Irek, So yeah, unfortunately, again, I think this is the third time in a row where I've been in the day one winning in and just should have won and just punted it. So maybe I just need to focus on endurance for these sorts of events, because 9 rounds is quite a lot, especially if you're focusing a lot. But I think this is definitely a case where the deck was good enough. I just made a few stupid mistakes and unfortunately didn't make it through to day 2. But it is what it is, and making it to day 2 isn't as big as it was previously because there's no more leaderboard system. But either way, this definitely feels like a case where the deck was good enough, and I'm definitely going to continue iterating on this archetype going forwards, but I just made a few stupid mistakes. Okay, so ended up 6-3, and I'm pretty certain if we hadn't punted that last game, we definitely should have made it. So it definitely, and also I made a few mistakes earlier in the rounds as well. So this definitely feels like a case where the deck should have made day 2, and I unfortunately didn't for a few misplays, but I'm really happy with this deck overall. I wouldn't make any changes going forward in the current meta game, and like I said in the deck tech, I just feel like this deck is super adaptable to changes in the meta game. You know, you can tweak the main deck interaction, but most importantly, you can really just refix the sideboard to counter whatever the top decks in the format are at any given time. So I'm really excited about this deck, and it's definitely an archetype that I'm going to be returning to as the meta game evolves. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video. Like I said, I've got a bunch of other historic decks that I worked on in the run-up to this event that I'm going to be covering in deck guide videos over the coming few weeks, so keep your eyes open for that. Either way, thanks a lot for watching. Thanks for being patient and waiting for the videos to come back. And I'll catch you on the next one. Big up.